In the world we live in, people can be divided into three categories: heroes, ordinary citizens, and villains. However, not every hero is famous, and ordinary people sometimes surprise us. So it's not fair to say that every villain is a bad person, but there will always be those who follow the stereotype. And that's what our protagonist believes, who is, without a doubt, the villain. A bright light, like the moon, shines from an unknown ceiling. A blonde guy with a delinquent vibe has just woken up and wonders what's going on. Around him, two more people regain consciousness and find themselves in the same situation. The fourth person, an older man, begins trying to calm the others around him. He is immediately interrupted by the blonde guy, who gets irritated and asks how anyone can stay calm in a situation like this. Then the blonde attacks the old man, throwing him against the wall and accusing him of kidnapping everyone in the room. The other people in the room, a girl and a young man, are surprised by how quickly the situation escalates. The older man takes a deep breath, grabs the arms of the guy who pushed him, and knees him between the ribs. Even on the floor, the delinquent seems determined to keep fighting, until the man who hit him extends a hand, causing surprise. The older man explains that just like them, he had just woken up in that room and introduces himself as Kim Chang-suk. Ignoring the request to avoid jumping to conclusions, the delinquent starts yelling again but is quickly interrupted by a hand. Chang-suk stares sternly at the blonde, who stares back, creating tension in the room. Breaking the ice, the other young man introduces himself as Yu Sung-hoon. The girl quickly joins in, saying her name is Yu Mina. Then the delinquent calms down a little and says his name is Shin Pilsup. A glow appears in front of each of them. The glow turns into a system window, and Sung-hoon is the first to speak up. Mina then asks if anyone else has seen the weird screen, and Pilsup thinks he must have drunk too much the night before. The girl asks the others if they can also see the mission screen, and Chang-suk suggests discussing what's going on. Once again, the blonde gets annoyed and asks the old man why he's trying to act like the leader. Mina cuts in, saying that the most important thing is to talk about the present, and Pilsup asks why he should listen to a teenager. Sung-hoon loses his patience and tells the delinquent he should shut up, and once again the blonde protests. But the young man soon points in the direction of the reason to stay quiet. A strange noise comes from a broken wooden door, and some splinters fall to the floor. Someone is moving on the other side, if you can even call a zombie someone. The monster furiously charges through the hole in the door, trying to get in, causing panic among the people inside the mysterious room. A new mission appears on the screen. There are 3 ways to complete it: surviving, annihilating, or escaping. Some become even more nervous, while others think or try to calm the rest. The system screen changes. Surviving means being the last one alive. Annihilating means eliminating all people possessed by evil spirits. And escaping means finding a way out, but without any guarantees that the exit is actually a way to escape. Amid the confusion, the group decides that the first thing to do is build a barricade. But it's too late, and the possessed creature has already entered the chat. Right after that, a fist joins the chat too, resulting in the punch that Chang-suk lands on the zombie's face. The monster staggers backward, which makes the veteran realize that, in fact, the creature is weak. Chang-suk yells for the others to find something to hit the monster with, because the 4 of them together could take it down. The younger ones begin looking around. In the corner of the room, a high-up camera captures the situation. Several glowing screens suggest there are many more cameras in the place. An old man sipping coffee asks if the tutorial has started, and the intern confirms it has. The boss, who looks like a butler, observes that the group of people in the room is rather unusual. 3 of the people in the room are fighting the possessed one, while Sung-hoon just watches. Since he started watching in the middle, the old man doesn't quite get it and asks the intern what's going on. The young man asks his superior to look at the blonde man on the camera. Then the intern reveals that Pilsup was actually the first to wake up and interact with the system screen. After understanding the floating screen, the delinquent laid down and pretended to be unconscious like the others. The boss is surprised that Pilsup had already figured out the screens available in the system, but then bursts into laughter at the young man's slyness. Then the intern points to Kim Chang-suk and says he's impressive too, because he already started with a skill. It's not uncommon to have a skill at the beginning, but the man's is high level. On screen, we see that Chang-suk has a skill called Command. The ability has a B rank, which is very rare in the tutorial. The employee also explains that it's thanks to the veteran's command that the others were paralyzed and were able to act. Then the old man wonders if they will be the first to complete the tutorial, but the intern doesn't understand how that could happen. Then both are shocked by what just happened on the screen. Chang-suk is stabbed in the neck with a stake. The one holding the stake, Sung-hoon, apologizes and says this is the only viable way for him to survive. Mina screams in despair at the sudden twist. The girl goes into a panic attack, and the young man with the stake walks over to her. Sung-hoon glances at her briefly, and then makes another victim. Without a trace of remorse, the young man moves on and turns to face the last one left. Pilsup is frozen, unsure of how to react. The delinquent's eyes widen as Sung-hoon approaches, and soon he also gets taken down. The system congratulates the young man who finished off the rest of the group for completing the tutorial. Then the system announces that Yu Sung-hoon has been selected to participate in the game that will choose the next god, called the Mission. The mysterious room begins to glow intensely, and someone appears to greet the winner. The young man looks back and sees an angelic figure who introduces himself as Jerry, his supporter. Jerry explains that they are in a world called Mission, a stadium created by the deities to choose the next supreme god. Sung-hoon analyzes the situation and concludes that clearly, he's not on Earth anymore. The young man asks the guy if this isn't something out of a manga, and Jerry replies it's more like a video game, but with one difference. In this game, you can die for real, and the only ways to leave are by dying or becoming a god. Our budding sociopath gets irritated. His supposed supporter was basically telling him he couldn't return alive. Trying to ease the situation, Jerry informs him that he can revive once before dying, thus having 2 lives. Sung-hoon is surprised by the deity's audacity and wonders what happened to the people he unlived. Then the protagonist turns to the deity and asks if there's any way to fix his scratched hand. Jerry snaps his fingers and not only heals, but also cleans the young man's hand. The supporter stares at Sung-hoon with interest. It was unthinkable that he already held the title of traitor in his first mission. The young man keeps staring at the hand that was magically healed. Wasting no time, Jerry brings up the inventory window and guides the protagonist through items and skills to prepare for the real game. 3 hours later, Sung-hoon is still staring at the system screen with the seriousness of a pro gamer. After much thought about his future build, our tryhard buys an inventory expansion and 4 basic swordsman skills. Meanwhile, Jerry just keeps evaluating the young man's choices. The deity even admires the intelligence in the young man's choices, which prioritize survival. Meanwhile, the protagonist, who even bought a hair skin, is finally ready. Jerry asks if he's ready so they can begin the real test, sparking the young man's curiosity. Then the deity summons a dog and says, "Kill this dog." Some of him is in shock. The little dog is too cute. As he pets the poor animal, Jerry says this is the first real battle, but the dog won't fight back. And what's the problem, right? Since he seemed pretty comfortable taking people out earlier. The protagonist reflects it's true that he already offed 3 people. With a trembling hand, our guy tells himself that at this point it doesn't make a difference. Then he raises his sword toward the poor dog. And so the mission is completed. Jerry is glad the young man didn't stall and tries to move on, but the protagonist gets sick. Sung-hoon falls to the ground and vomits. Even the deity is a bit confused. The young man keeps retching and Jerry starts to think he's about to quit. Things were going too well to be true. But our tryhard grabs the entity's leg. Sung-hoon asks for more and Jerry wonders, more what? And the protagonist says he wants something else to unlive. Jerry, who's already given up trying to understand this kid, says okay. In the end, the young man just wanted a chance to train his sword skills before entering the world of Mission. After the dog, it was over 100 goat, pig, giraffe, meerkat, cockatiel. Sung-hoon even managed to fight some monsters like goblins, orcs, and reptilians. Then, after training, Jerry tells the young man to value his life and finally sends him into the game. Among several other individuals, a portal opens. The people around are distressed, some carefully observe the new setting. Others scream and cry that they want to go home. Sung-hoon, freshly teleported, already decides he doesn't have time to sightsee. The young man walks over to a mission booth and is startled when the attendant calls him a player. The extremely weird woman starts recommending beginner missions like pest extermination. While Sung-hoon isn't impressed by the mission rewards, the bonus for being the first to complete it catches his eye. Our tryhard concludes that the best option is to start by focusing on raising his stats. The young man chooses the mission to hunt rats, and the attendant informs him he'll be teleported to the task location. Sung-hoon enters the portal confident it'll be easy. It's just some rats. Moments later, the young man is already screaming in frustration. The little rats are too small and fast. It's hard to catch one, let alone 5. And on top of that, no one taught him how to cancel a mission, so it's either kill the rats or be stuck in that warehouse forever. Thankfully, our little villain bought food while preparing for the game, or he would have starved trying to hunt rats. Then the protagonist remembered another item he bought earlier, low-level poison. After eating some poisoned breadcrumbs, the rats passed on to the next life. The attendant at the mission booth congratulated him for completing the rat hunting mission. The people behind him go wild that Sung-hoon already completed the task, and the young man gets annoyed with the attention the woman drew. Still, the protagonist feels like he should laugh since getting angry won't help, but the laugh is so awkward it activates the passive of his traitor title. Sung-hoon discovers his buff that makes him hard to shake, and just then, 2 players arrive asking for tips. At first, the protagonist decides to ignore them, but quickly gets an idea and turns to the newbies. Instead of answering, he asks the guide who spoke to him what title he has. The boy is confused but replies that his title is Brave Survivor, and Sung-hoon concludes he must be trustworthy. Sung-hoon decides it wouldn't be bad to have a few allies and advises the players not to do the rat mission. Since the protagonist already completed it, the people nearby get mad, saying he just doesn't want to share insight. Our tryhard loves that his competition is a bunch of fools. So everyone runs off to do the rat mission, doubting the young man, but he chooses the task of eliminating wolves. The girl with the young man asks him which mission they should do, and he chooses the same one as the protagonist. The brave boy asks Sung-hoon if he wants to form a party. Then he explains he's progressing together with his girlfriend and that group missions are possible. But our little sociopath doesn't want anyone in his way and says he works alone, then disappears into the portal for the next mission. As soon as our guy arrives, he starts setting traps in the dungeon. Then he coats his own dagger with poison, and just in time, the first wild wolf arrives. Sung-hoon is more than happy to have found his first target. Two massive wolves surround the protagonist. Sung-hoon draws his sword while evaluating which enemy is best to face first. At that moment, one of the wolves steps on the trap the young man had placed earlier. The young man then charges at the beast with his sword, but the wolf leaps into the air, dodging the trap. The monstrous creature lets out a roar. The protagonist quickly steps back, thinking that an injured wolf is still a wolf. Then Sung-hoon summons a magic circle, electrocuting the creature. And with a simple movement of his sword, the young man slices through the stunned creature, securing a kill. Meanwhile, the second wolf attacks the protagonist from behind, sinking its teeth into his shoulder, and the sword remains lodged in the other beast's body. So the young man lets go of his weapon and jumps right after, throwing himself backward and landing on the wolf. Sung-hoon pulls out his poisoned dagger, skillfully slashing the creature's eye. Earlier, the young man had purchased the basic poison mastery skill and the low-level trap setting skill. Combining both skills and using the experience he gained from the rat mission, our tryhard managed to kill 30 wolves. The system informs that Sung-hoon has successfully completed the mission, listing several rewards. Once again, the mission booth attendant shouts for all the world to hear that the protagonist completed the mission. Noticing the young man's discomfort, the woman says it's natural for her to be surprised and asks how his body feels. Sung-hoon changes the subject and asks where the inn is. The woman informs him he can find it by turning left at the block. The young man easily finds the place and enters, but he's stopped right at the door by an unknown hand. The young man asks the man blocking him what the problem is, and the man asks if he can really pay. Sung-hoon then searches his belongings for his money pouch. Seeing the 70,000 gold pouch, the man's attitude changes immediately, and he warmly welcomes the young man. Sitting at the table, the protagonist is attended by a girl and orders a lunchbox. While waiting, Sung-hoon checks his status window. Our tryhard notices that all of his stats are already level 10 or higher and wonders if it's usually this fast in the beginning. The two young people who previously asked for tips enter the inn and spot the protagonist. Happy with the coincidence, the young man asks if they can join Sung-hoon. He gives the pair a long look, but then nods his head in agreement. The group begins to introduce themselves. The guy's name is Lee Young-gi, and his girlfriend's name is Park Hyena. Young-gi thanks the young man for helping them avoid a trap, and the protagonist asks what happened. Stopping to think, Sung-hoon admits to himself that he hasn't heard any news since returning from the second mission. The two newcomers look at each other confused. Then the guy offers a trade. Sung-hoon asks what kind of trade. Then the guy offers to explain what happened in exchange for a meal. The young man considers the offer a bit sudden, but concludes that trading info for a cheap meal is worth it. The protagonist accepts the proposal and the couple gets excited. Young-gi explains that right after they returned from the first mission, people were outraged and began to protest in the city, but soldiers quickly arrived to shut down the commotion. The protest ended with some casualties, but the people who died suddenly came back to life. That's when they discovered the penalty for failure. Those who returned lost 3 points in all their stats. In addition, there are various types of shops in the city square and also a temple that allows for class change. Our tryhard notes that he already earned a second title for hunting all day and wonders if changing class will give him more skills. Finally, Young-gi shares that thanks to the protagonist, they went for pest hunting missions, while the folks who went for the rat mission haven't come back yet. The protagonist explains that it makes sense because what makes the mission difficult is that, despite being weak, the rats are extremely hard to catch. The waitress arrives with Sung-hoon's lunchbox. The couple looks at it, practically drooling. Then the young man makes a proposal. He'll buy them food every day, and in exchange, they'll gather information for him. Young-gi agrees on the spot, grabbing the young man's hand. Time passes and night falls. Sung-hoon steps out of the inn. Outside, several players who've turned into beggars ask for a coin, anything at all. The protagonist looks on with disdain. After all, everyone started the game the same way. So the young man ignores the people and starts walking, but ends up bumping into one of the beggars. The lunatic starts pretending he's dying and screams that the protagonist is going around hitting people. Sung-hoon stops walking for a moment. He thinks about how in the past he would have felt ashamed, lowered his head, and pretended to be a good person. But the truth is, he was never a good Samaritan. He just kept hiding his true nature. The crazy beggar keeps yelling and making a scene. Without any patience, the young man tells the guy that if he's hungry, he should figure it out himself, and he better stop screaming if he doesn't want to die. The man just drops to the ground and the rest of the crowd watches the scene in shock. Morning arrives, lighting up a grand temple. An old man welcomes everyone to the class change temple. He introduces himself as Philip, a creation made to help players. In other words, an NPC. Then the protagonist says he has a question for the NPC. Sung-hoon asks if there's a difference between the base classes he's already seen and the temple classes. The man considers the question, since the world only started recently. Philip concludes that our tryhard is an outlier. He's already wearing a jacket. The NPC explains that the classes he's seen are temporary. They change depending on the weapon chosen. But the temple classes are permanent and also develop the player's traits. The young man asks about the traits, and the old man says it's better to show than explain. Then a massive system screen appears with a class list. The temple suggests a class based on the player's experience. The recommended classes may or may not be stronger than others. They cost 500,000 gold, and once the young man has the money, he can come back to change his class. The protagonist sees the benefit in switching, and after eliminating the classes that restrict skill use, only 2 remain. The remaining classes are Swordsman and Benevolent Fugitive. Both seem reasonably good. However, the Benevolent Fugitive class prevents the player from using cowardly tactics, and our little villain doesn't like that one bit. Sun-hoon concludes that he has no choice. So the young man asks the NPC to change his class to Swordsman. The old man asks if he already has the money. The protagonist pulls a fat pouch from his inventory, catching Philip off guard. Compared to the other players starving in the plaza, the young man is already rich. Everything around glows, and the NPC congratulates him for choosing the path of the swordsman, changing Sun-hoon's class. The protagonist notices he now has passive and active skills, and that he gained 3 points in each stat. On the way back, the young man wonders what his active skill called Directed Steps does. He's eager to test it out. However, he notices 2 people staring at him intensely. One of them is a big red-headed guy. The other is a sinister-looking woman with a ponytail. Archard notes that the man is wearing a distinctive suit of armor, and the woman has 2 katanas. The protagonist wonders if they're watching him because, like them, he has gear. A guy passing by shouts at the woman and grabs her wrist. The lunatic says his big brother wants to talk to her and asks if she didn't hear him calling. The woman simply asks him to let go of her, but the guy pretends not to understand. Then the woman loses her patience and says she won't repeat herself. Either he lets go, or he loses an arm. But the fool thinks he's tough and asks if she's blind or insane. And with that, less than a second later, the guy's arm is flying through the air. As usual, Sun-hoon just watches, and the guys in the armless dudes group are completely in shock. While the idiot screams in pain, the woman stares at him like none of it has anything to do with her. Summoning a green aura, the sinister woman warns the guy's buddies that anyone who wants to live with just 1 arm is free to stand in her way. The fools tremble and scream, run, and flee as fast as they can. The protagonist senses a strange pressure coming from the woman, but he's unaffected, maybe because his stats just increase after changing class. Then the big guy goes to talk to a young man, noting that he seems to have a good head on his shoulders, and our little villain doesn't understand. Then the guy tells him not to play dumb. His gear makes it obvious he made a scene in the tutorial, and since he's walking out of the temple, he's probably already changed class. The protagonist deflects by asking what the guy wants. Setting a trap, the big guy reveals that his title is leader, then asks the young man what his title is. Knowing his own title is suspicious, Sun-hoon says his title is Brave Survivor, copying Yeongi's answer. The Shady One introduces himself as Kang Moo-han and asks if the young man wants to join them. The protagonist asks what the benefits are. Moo-han says the benefits include trustworthy allies, financial support, and the protection of a strong guy like him. The young man questions whether he's really that strong, and the redhead says his strength is 50. Moo-han explains that his real-life strength was transferred into the game, so if Sun-hoon was smart on Earth, he must be smart in the mission too. Even after changing class, the young man's strength is only 20, and he thinks about how unfair this game is. In the end, our little villain declines the offer. He likes to work alone. Moo-han says if he changes his mind, he should head to Hatafa, where he'll be well treated. But now the protagonist is more determined than ever to become stronger. Sun-hoon looks at the mission list and concludes that if he wants to pay the bills, he'll have to take on harder tasks. Then, arriving at the same time as the sinister woman, both request the sick orc mission. They lock eyes for a moment, and the woman tells the attendant to hurry up and assign her the mission. The protagonist then realizes that she's trying to finish the mission before him to get the bonus. He also hastily asks the booth lady to send him into the mission. She's a bit confused by both of their behavior, but complies. Sun-hoon is teleported into a forest. The young man briefly worries about the mission's difficulty, but decides he doesn't have time for that. Our little villain pulls out a roast chicken from his inventory and makes it appear in front of the orcs. One of the monsters gets excited, while the other says something isn't right. The slightly smarter orc says it's weird to find ready food in the middle of a forest, and the other ends up agreeing. The protagonist gets frustrated with the orc's intelligence and decides to charge in before the woman completes the mission first. Summoning the magic circle again, Sun-hoon targets the smarter monster and zaps him with lightning. The other orc screams upon seeing the human. Holding his long sword, the young man confirms the creature's suspicion and attacks. To his surprise, the orc blocks the attack with a wooden club. The young man realizes that the orcs Jerry summoned are nothing compared to the real deal. In the middle of combat, the protagonist tries to remember if he has any techniques suited for this situation. Then the orc crouches, preparing a new attack. The monster leaps at the protagonist, and if he doesn't think of something fast, he's done for. Sun-hoon had made the mistake of underestimating the orcs. He believed he could take down 2 at once just because they were supposedly sick, but his lightning attack only managed to stall one of them briefly. Taunting the young man, one of the monsters yells that he's too weak. The young man starts to worry about the possibility of defeat. To preserve his honor, the orc named Gult tells the other that he will face the protagonist alone. Gult stomps the ground and assumes a battle stance. While thinking frantically about what to do, Sung-hoon begins considering all possibilities. Then he remembers his active skill. With no other choice, the young man charges in, relying on luck. The first strike comes from the orc, who charges fast with his sword. Sung-hoon yells the name of his skill and rushes into the attack. The sword grazes his face, cutting it. But the movement allowed the protagonist to strike Gult with his dagger in a vital spot. The orc partner screams Gult's name in worry. In disbelief, the less intelligent creature watches live as the human claims victory. The young man drops the monster's body to the ground. With his body shaking, Sung-hoon takes a deep breath and looks toward his next opponent. You can tell the orc realizes he's screwed. Using the skill again, the young man launches toward the creature like a bullet. The second monster sees that the protagonist is trembling and assumes he must have used up all his stamina in the previous fight. Then the orc slams the club on the ground using both hands. But now familiar with his new skill, Sung-hoon is already behind the opponent. The creature turns around horrified, just in time to take a dagger to the heart. Staggering, the orc begs for mercy. But the protagonist tells him to just die, and makes the monster's head roll. The rest of the orc's body drops to the ground right after. Sung-hoon looks up at the sky in relief. This time he thought he was a goner. Looking at the scene, the protagonist reflects on why it was so difficult. He only needs to eliminate one more to complete the mission, but he doesn't want to risk losing any bonuses. Our little villain then opens his inventory window, and from it he pulls out a fishing rod line. Determined not to face any more enemies head-on, the young man stretches the nylon thread while grinning wickedly. In the orc village, things are a complete mess. The chief asks where the patrols are and why they haven't returned, and the soldiers report that 14 orcs are missing. Then the leader yells to everyone that this is definitely the work of humans, mobilizing all his warriors for battle. However, one of the poor monsters points out that most of them are sick with high fever. The chief shouts that this is exactly why they need to resolve this quickly. Otherwise, they'll be attacked in their beds once the illness worsens. The small orc agrees and apologizes. Gripping his staff tightly, the leader promises that whoever messed with the red feather orcs will pay, and adds that he'll chop the culprit into pieces, feed them to the wolves, then watch the remains rot. Despite everything, the forest seems peaceful on the outside. Warriors patrol while complaining that it's cruel to be on guard duty while sick, and their lack of attention causes one of them to step on a leaf-covered trap. The orc screams as he's swallowed by a deep pit. From the top of the hole, the other one asks if his friend is okay. At the bottom, the monster realizes something has cut him, unaware that the stakes around him are poisoned. As he shouts for his partner to help, the orc outside the hole notices a shadow approaching. Looking back quickly, the monster yells that he found a human, and immediately charges at the protagonist. Some of him approves, saying their goals align. The blades clash with a metallic sound. Everything suggests the opponents are evenly matched. The protagonist thinks it would have been bad if he tried to fight 7 orcs at once, but this number is manageable. He could even take on 2 monsters at once using directed steps, but that would risk draining his mana and leaving him unable to use the skill. That's why Sung-hoon built his plan around fighting one enemy at a time. While using his skill, the young man realizes that little by little he's getting stronger, and another feverish orc loses his head. The head rolls across the ground. Until it reaches the monster who just climbed out of the trap, he screams in fright. The patrol orc tries to intimidate the protagonist, saying his nearby comrades won't let this go unpunished. But Sung-hoon isn't impressed. In fact, he tells the creature to go ahead and call his buddies, and lets the monster run off to get reinforcements. Making full use of his longsword, the protagonist eliminates the enemies one by one. It seems to be getting easier each time, and our little villain even starts trying different things, like pulling an entire tooth out of an orc's skull. Apparently, the young man won't have any problems completing the mission. Our Trihard's inventory is already filled with stolen items and orc body parts. Some of him calculates how many times he can use his skills, considering only 14 monsters remain. So the young man hurries and searches through the forest. From the top of a small rise, the protagonist sneaks behind a tree, finally finding the source of the orcs. The player notices the village is far too quiet, no one is passing by or guarding the entrance. Deciding to sneak in, the young man begins to smell something awful. A little further in, he finds rows of orcs so sick they can't even move. Sung-hoon observes that the monsters he fought earlier also had red marks on their skin, but not this many. Taking advantage of the situation, the protagonist draws his sword. It's going to be easier than he thought. But as the young man gets closer, he hesitates. The orcs are suffering terribly. One of the creatures begins whimpering for help. Our little villain even feels a bit guilty, but convinces himself that to him, these enemies are just slabs of meat, and that this will be merciful. From outside, all you can hear are the creature's final moments. That makes 29. One more and the mission will be complete. Sung-hoon hears orc noises coming from outside. One of the enemies finds a human footprint on the ground. The monster leader orders his warriors to surround the perimeter, and the protagonist mentally curses himself for getting distracted. Limping from age and illness, the orc chief can't believe that while they were patrolling, a single human infiltrated the village. Because he's sick, the elder didn't smell the ketchup when he entered the sick ward, and ends up tripping over the protagonist's wire trap. The old orc crashes hard to the ground and lets out a little yelp. After falling, the chief looks down at his feet to understand what's happening. Then he immediately spots the fishing line. Before the opponent can react, Sung-hoon attacks with his sword, slicing off an arm. But apparently, it was the wrong arm, because with the other hand, the orc slams his staff into the ground, casting a fire spell. The flaming projectiles fly toward the young man, who's already prepared. Then the protagonist uses his step skill again. Now that he's learned the trick, he can predict the necessary movements to dodge the flames just barely. However, due to a lack of experience and physical skill, he stumbles, resulting in a fireball hitting his left shoulder directly. The orc chief asks if the young man liked the magic and promises to turn the tryhard into barbecue. With a quick footwork move, Sung-hoon manages to recover his stance instead of falling. Then the protagonist informs his opponent that, unfortunately for him, the player has a passive trait that's always active. Basic magic resistance helps reduce and resist overall magical damage. Normally, fire spells deal continuous damage, but thanks to his magic resistance, the flames went out after burning just a bit. The elder is shocked by how little this power accomplished. And just as the enemy finishes yelling about how he can't believe what's happening, his head rolls away. The other orcs saw the whole thing and are now running madly in search of revenge. But Sung-hoon is focused on something else. A mission window informs him that the task is complete and asks if he wants to return to the city. The young man gives a little smirk and says they didn't even need to ask. While the enemies rush toward him, the young man teleports out, announcing that the mission is already done, vanishing as if he'd never been there, leaving 3 confused orcs behind. And finally, we're back in the city. The protagonist exits the unsatisfied. He completed the mission faster than the sinister woman and earned the bonus. Then he starts checking the spoils of the expedition, especially the unnamed wand of the orc elder. Unfortunately, the item only grants 1% reduced mana cost when activating a skill. Well, better than nothing. Selma teleports beside him, catching him off guard. And suddenly, the sword girl is right next to him. They stare at each other for a moment, and the protagonist concludes that she also finished the mission in slaughter mode. Sung-hoon shifts his focus back to the mission board. Then he turns to Sarah, our booth lady, and asks for the Ratman elimination mission. The woman beside him stares in silence, then decides that she's going to do the Ratman mission too. Sarah is a bit surprised, but says alright. And the protagonist is surprised that the woman is once again following him. Now we've ended up in a dungeon with several tunnels. Something catches the attention of a hooded rat. The creature looks back and suddenly sees a strange girl standing there. The rat asks who the intruder is, but the rude girl barges into someone else's home and ignores the resident entirely. Wasting no words, the young woman charges at the poor creature. She attacks the rat, who barely defends and narrowly dodges. The creature starts panicking in fear of the weirdo and prepares to run. But it's too late. The maniac is already activating his skill. Before the poor ratman can even react, the one has already pierced through his body. The rat drops dead to the ground, poor thing. And the heartless woman sheaths her sword behind her back. Her mind is still stuck on what she saw earlier. Our boy, another heartless one, was carrying the orc elder's staff. The girl clenches her fist like she's holding a $200 bill in it, and stares angrily at the ground, wondering if the young man might actually be stronger than she is. The funniest part is that, unlike the protagonist who used every dirty trick in the book, she took down all 30 orcs with her bare hands. And to top it off, the girl named Renee already had 3 skills that, combined, were more powerful than the special forces. The young woman goes on her way, thinking there's no way that Lunatic is stronger than her. What he really seems like is a total arrogant jerk. Meanwhile, on the other side, in another mission, Sung-hoon feels his ear burning, surrounded by countless rats suffering in real time. Hello, animal welfare authorities. And that terrible kid poisons about 400 grams of cheese. Back in the city, someone is showering him with praise. None other than the owner of the item shop. However, at the moment, the young man still isn't enough. In the last mission, he was fast, but Mine was fueled by pure rage, and even faster. Sung-hoon started to wonder if poison traps alone would be enough to make him number 1. Back at the shop, the NPC named Juju does some calculations to figure out how much he owes the protagonist. An interesting thing about the NPCs in the mission world is that, like players, they have their own personalities. Not to mention, the entire city was built to truly feel like a game, dividing people into 3 categories. The poor, who barely scrape by, the ordinary, who find ways to survive, and the rankers, the most talented players who control basically everything and probably spent their previous lives playing RPGs in a dark room. The girl at the skill bookstore asks Sung-hoon if he's saved up enough to buy one of the books. The young man confirms but asks for the skill book as if he were robbing the place. 2 books then become the young man's possession, 1 intermediate swordsmanship and 1 intermediate poisoning. Sung-hoon asks the blonde if she just used a slang word, but she dodges and says he must have heard wrong. Obsessed with his silent rival, the young man wonders if now he'll be able to defeat her. Not long ago, he had lost another first completion bonus to Mei Renee, taking a hit of 2 million guiles. The protagonist stares at the girl with hatred in his heart, and she, as always, says nothing, just observes. In the city center square, the biggest fair is going on. There, Sung-hoon finds a poor girl to redo the mission he lost to Renee, now that he's stronger. The young man asks the girl what roles are available, and she lists a few, but what the group really needs is a warrior. Then the girl looks him up and down, and concludes that the guy looks clean but clearly broke, hardly someone from a high class. She tries to explain to him that the mission seems easy, but it's actually level C, and asks the protagonist what his skills are like. Sung-hoon immediately flexes, showing off his stats. The girl then asks if he's a ranker, but our young man says no, his gear is mediocre. She's impressed by how many rewards he's gotten by pure luck. The girl introduces herself as Sun Ayan and asks Sung-hoon if he's ready, and he cluelessly says yes. Ayan cheers and tells her new teammate to follow her. The two arrive at a tavern where a bunch of people are peacefully having lunch. The girl tells a guy leaning against the wall that she found a warrior, but the guy is super rude. Then Ayan explains that the skinny guy actually has better stats than he does. The guy is shocked and suddenly humble, then asks if the young man is a ranker. But the girl explains the same thing the protagonist told her, it was all a twist of fate. Then the guy introduces himself as Park Dong-kyul, and Sung-hoon notes that he's a very straightforward person. Still acting all harmless, our little villain introduces himself and says he'll call Dong-kyul Big Brother because of the age difference. It works perfectly, and the warrior already starts calling the guy Little Brother. He even shows off his axe to prove how strong he is. The protagonist says the axe looks really heavy, but must be as strong as its owner. Clearly, our guy is up to something, and it's nothing good. And it works like a charm, because the guy's a meathead who can't even tell when someone's being sarcastic. Dong-kyul asks if the girl introduced herself and said she's an archer. Sitting in the corner is someone dressed like a ninja named Il-woo, a seemingly genderless thief of the group. At the table sipping coffee is a hot blonde, and the guy doesn't even mention her name, just that she's a mage and a ranker. Our pretender then asks if she's a foreigner and is a bit surprised since he thought there were only Koreans in the mission world. The woman introduces herself and says her name is Ellie. Mages are rare even among the best because magic skill books are so expensive that leveling up becomes way harder. Sung-hoon questions whether it's not risky to go in with only 2 fighters, 1 assassin, and 2 carries. The big dummy Dong-kyul says that the mission they're heading to, Investigation of the Moonlit Cave, is super easy, and with more people, they'd just get fewer rewards. So the group concludes it's more than enough to complete the mission, and everyone looks toward the camera. And we finally find out that the one who spread the rumor that the mission was easy was none other than Sung-hoon himself. He even sold the cave map and shared the method to conquer the terrain. We already knew, right? Our boy is definitely plotting something shady. Good thing, I'm just the narrator. The adventurers arrive at a beautiful place where everything has a magical purplish hue, and the moon is always visible, filled with werewolves, of course. Sung-hoon already has his hand on his sword, but the other warrior tells him to relax. There are no monsters at the beginning, only once they enter the cave. The protagonist plays dumb, agrees, and puts the sword away. Overall, the group seems relaxed, probably having done the mission several times before. But when he looks back, Sung-hoon notices that the mage doesn't look so well. The woman looks uneasy, trembling slightly, gripping her staff like it's a bus pole. Dong-kyul, being the melee guy, tells Ellie that if she's scared, she can hold his arm. But Ayan barges in like a truck and elbows the guy right in the ribs. Totally annoying, the girl says they don't have time and grabs his arm herself. Now that's some attitude. This makes the protagonist wonder if those two are in a relationship. The ninja thief just adjusts their mask and walks right past. Then they start moving and Dong-kyul is still getting scolded for being a sleaze. But Sung-hoon notices Ellie still looks weird and is lagging behind. He offers his hand to the woman, who looks surprised. The mage tries to pretend she's fine, but our guy, faking gentlemanly concern, tells her the ground is uneven and mages have low stamina. She tries to argue with him, but he tells her to just take his hand already. At this rate, they'll get separated from the group. So the two end up holding hands. The calculating young man wants to score points with the woman because she's a ranker mage, and as a bonus, she's hot. And here we thought Sung-hoon only liked money. The Moonlit Cave contains various minerals with unique properties. People describe the experience of being in the cave as walking through a star-filled night sky. Though Wu asks the rest of the group to stop, they just detected a trap. The protagonist can also see the trap clearly with his skill, but he keeps quiet and lets the robe do their job. They pour some bleach on the stone, and not only does the rock vanish, but the bear trap beneath it breaks. The group can move forward. The protagonist notes that the thief has some decent skills, at least intermediate, and decides to keep an eye on them. Then the young man asks the pretty lady if she's really a ranker. She says she's not sure, but others say she is. Sung-hoon flatters her, saying she's amazing, and then lies, claiming he finds high-level rankers fascinating. The woman says she's nothing compared to top-tier players. After all, high-level rankers are on another level, like a divine existence. Among the highest-class players is our beloved Nai Rene, known as the Demon Sword, and the Spear King Kang Muhen, who's basically Sukuna moonlighting. Monsters like them make a player like Ellie feel unworthy of the ranker title. The protagonist comments that high-level mages are super rare, so she should be at the top. The woman thanks him but gets shy, saying she's really not all that. Farther ahead, Dong-kyul yells for everyone to hurry because the werewolves have appeared, and 2 upright, feral wolves wearing sweatpants enter the scene. The melee fighters charge forward and the mage and archer get into position. But Donkiel shouts at the ranged fighters not to attack. He and Sunhoon are going to kill the wolves. The protagonist wonders whether this is a strategy to save resources early on or if the guy just wants to show off and decides to go along with it for now. Then the goofball yells out the name of his skill and slams his axe on the ground as if he wants to split the cave in half. Debris flies everywhere from the impact and some stones hit one of the werewolves. The other muscular werewolf lets out a loud roar before retaliating, but it's confused when a longsword suddenly appears in front of it. The protagonist informs the creature that these are one-on-one battles, so naturally the beast charges at him. Werewolves have a lot of strength, but their attacks are predictable. With Sunhoon's dexterity, it's easy to dodge. After the attack, the boy adjusts his grip on the sword with both hands. He swings in a 180-degree arc in front of him, slicing the werewolf. Ian observes that with those abilities, the protagonist should be a ranker, and Ellie agrees. Sunhoon regrets drawing so much attention. That wasn't his intention, but he got excited with his new skills. Donkiel uses another skill where he rushes forward with his axe, and the creature instantly regrets getting out of bed today, as it gets sliced in half like a birthday cake. The guy was about to brag, then he realizes that beside him, the other warrior of the team is still fighting the werewolf. Clearly annoyed that the battle isn't over yet, he decides to step in, spinning his axe with full force, also cutting the second mutt clean in two. The girls thank him and Donkiel feels on top of the world. Then the warrior asks the protagonist why he was taking so long in that fight with the wolf. Sunhoon lies through his teeth and says he didn't buy any active skills. Everyone is stunned, even the ninja. The group actually thinks they misheard, so he repeats the same sentence, and that's when they're truly shocked. Trying to understand what's going through this young man's head, skills can be divided into two categories: active, which you have to cast, and passive, which are always active. Ideally, a player should have at least 3 active skills for every 7 passives. Some had advantages far too obvious to pass up. Donkiel asks the boy how that's even possible. Sunhoon replies that he's never been able to buy one. They're too expensive and he only has good stats thanks to luck. The warrior evaluates what the young man said. It's true, there were several shallow cuts on the werewolf's body, nothing fatal, so it must be true. And then he feels like yelling at the protagonist, but he thinks about it and concludes that if they fought, he'd lose, so he says nothing. Then Donkiel, who's not as dumb as he seems, says to forget it and turns away. Our shameless protagonist just apologizes. Then the group continues through the cave with beautiful crystalline walls. The warrior asks his girlfriend what she thinks of him, and she starts by saying that in terms of explosive power, Donkiel is better. But in overall combat, Sunhoon is better, and she believes the protagonist could restrain at least 4 wolves at once. The warrior understands her point of view, and glances towards Sunhoon, who has a blank expression on his face. But his attention shifts to the sound of a werewolf arriving by surprise. The creature was on a rock above the team and was about to pounce. Someone shouts the mage's name and she quickly responds, conjuring ice spears from the top of her staff. The spears strike the monster before it can leap. Ilwu throws 3 daggers at the werewolf, causing several cuts on the creature's legs. With the beast stunned, Ion fires an arrow to finish it off, hitting the werewolf between the eyes. Donkiel happily says the team is more than capable of completing the mission. Sunhoon praises the rogue's skill and shamelessly asks what level their dagger-throwing skill is. Ilwu simply replies that's not a question you ask. But our cheeky protagonist flatters them, saying they're way better than another thief he knows. The ninja takes the bait and says the skill is low level, but they practice a lot. Then Sunhoon changes the subject and asks Donkiel how far they plan to go in the mission, and the warrior replies they'll finish it on adventurer difficulty. The protagonist is dissatisfied with the answer, but just as he was about to protest, Ilwu blurts out that they should finish it on the highest difficulty, catching Donkiel off guard. Ion jumps in and asks if that wouldn't be too hard, since they have to kill the moon werewolf and solve the cave's mystery. Sunhoon argues that completing the mission on adventurer difficulty and having to split the reward 5 ways is worse than doing a lower level mission. Donkiel agrees but asks if going higher than that wouldn't be too dangerous, and Ilwu immediately replies that not necessarily. Then the rogue adds that since Sunhoon is equivalent to 2 average warriors and Ellie uses high-level magic, they can definitely win. Even so, Donkiel still feels uneasy and asks if they could just go up 1 difficulty level. So Ilwu decides to make an offer. He says he'll give up some of the best items from the reward, and the couple immediately starts considering it. Sunhoon finds it odd that someone would give up something so valuable and wants to know what the rogue is planning. So he asks Ilwu why he wants so badly to complete the mission on the highest difficulty, and the rogue explains that he's trying to trigger his evolution. To move to the next level of his class, he needs to complete a level C mission on slaughter difficulty, convincing the group. Then Donkiel proposes that in return, safety should always come first, asking the mage to use her magic anytime the situation seems bad. They already know the path, so Ilwu just needs to follow and watch out for traps. Then the warrior rallies the team to move on. Sunhoon is grateful that Ilwu resolved the issue for him, but at the same time he's a bit shocked by the rogue's strength. The team keeps slicing through the werewolves, and also stabbing the werewolves. The ground is covered with what's left of their enemies. Donkiel says this is the point where the mid-boss shows up and asks if anyone else knows what it looks like. Ilwu asks if it's the black werewolf, and the warrior confirms. Once they disable the next trap, a massive cave will appear, and from it will come 5 mid-tier werewolves and 1 very strong one. The Rove asks how strong the creature is, and Donkiel replies that in his view, it's 3 times stronger than a normal one. Sunhoon cuts in and says he'll take care of the mid-boss. Donkiel is glad the protagonist volunteered but worries about him. The boy replies that he can't finish the creature, but he can hold it off. Then the leader agrees but warns him not to try anything reckless. Donkiel says he can take out 2 wolves and asks Ilwu if he can handle 3. But Ellie volunteers for the task, since the warrior will be dealing with 2. She'll take 1 down as soon as the trap is disabled. Sunhoon will handle the boss, so she, the archer, and the rogue can take care of 2 werewolves. The group is surprised by how solid the plan is and agrees. Since they agreed, the mage gets ready. Ellie recites an incantation in a strange language, and her staff glows as brightly as the sun, partially blinding the rest of the team. Then the mage lifts her staff, now wreathed in flames while levitating, leaving everyone in complete shock. Ellie launches a fireball that would make any dragon jealous, roasting a werewolf who probably earns minimum wage at best to go through that. Donkiel shouts to the team that everything's going as planned. From a distance, Aion fires arrows while Sunghoo charges at his target, skewering the head of one of the regular werewolves on his way. Then a monstrous shadow looms over the protagonist, and the boy greets the creature, which stands over 3 meters tall. Without hesitation, the black werewolf attacks Sunhoon. The protagonist jumps just in time to dodge, and the creature smashes the ground where he stood. From above, our tryhard finds the perfect opening and electrocutes the giant werewolf. When the monster snaps out of its stunned state, Sunghoo drops, spinning his longsword, and eliminates the threat. The protagonist is satisfied to discover it's true that if you have enough proficiency with this skill, you don't need to speak to activate it. Aion comments on how Sunghoo took down the black werewolf alone, drawing the rest of the group's attention. The girl notes that the protagonist is way better than the other warrior and asks if he really isn't a ranker. Once again, the guy forgets he's supposed to be playing weak, so the liar points at the mage and says he managed to defeat the monster alone because the fireball partially hit. And surprisingly, he convinces the whole team. Ilwu suddenly shows up with a frying pan saying they're going to cook for everyone. The couple practically forgets the entire battle, and they prepare a delicious stew with meat, potatoes, and leeks. Then the group starts eating peacefully. However, one of Sunhoon's passives activates, warning him that there's poison in the food. The protagonist starts thinking it couldn't have been Donkiel or Aion. Ellie notices that the boy isn't eating and asks if the food isn't good. Sunhoon replies that it's good, but he's just feeling a bit choked. Although the world of the mission is very similar to a game, there are a few differences. Not every anomaly in your body shows up in your system window, and poisoning-related skills can fool the system and deceive people. Taking an antidote, the protagonist thinks that it doesn't matter. He was planning to poison everyone anyway. After filling their stomachs, the group decides to continue the mission. They find a wall with 2 cave entrances, and Ellie asks which one they should follow. The couple explains that the left path has no enemies but is filled with traps from end to end, while the right one only has a few werewolves. Then all that's left is to defeat the Crescent Moon Wolf, which gets the mage excited. Ellie runs ahead as if eager to face the enemy. Meanwhile, someone who really knows the cave is just waiting for the right moment to press the button on the wall. Let the games begin. Like an earthquake, the cave ceiling starts to collapse. The players make it to the other side just in time to escape the cave-in, except for Sunhoon, who was exhausted from keeping up his act. On the other side, Donkiel asks if everyone's okay and blames Ilwu for not spotting the trap. Then they realize the protagonist was trapped behind the rubble. The rogue doesn't apologize and says it must have been an automatic trap, and the warrior gets angry because someone died and he's only making excuses. Ellie tells the man to calm down. The protagonist has way too much dexterity to have died in that trap. Then Donkiel assumes he'll take the left path and meet them in the boss room, but Aion says it's going to be tough. Either way, they can't do anything now, so it's best to continue. Only 20 wolves left to finish the mission. The 4 players move on through the purple cave. At what appears to be the cave's end, there's a mysterious blue glow. The Crescent Moon Wolf is lit like a lightning bolt. Ellie fires a fireball to start the battle again. The massive fireball flies toward the beast. Then the monster lets out a roar that echoes through the cave walls, lowering all enemies' stats by 10% in the battle. Donkiel uses his attack step skill to approach the monster. The archer draws an arrow to provide support, but for some reason it's very difficult to pull it back. When Aion finally draws the bow, her entire body trembles. At that moment, the mage beside her collapses. Ellie falls to the ground, dropping her staff, and the archer is confused. In that moment, a blade pierces her back. Aion drops her bow and turns her head to see Ilwu. The trader says that usually you twist the blade to make sure, but this dagger might break, so this will have to do. And since the blade was coated in poison, it'll take at least a day and a half for her to wake up. Now only the warrior and the boss remain. Ilwu throws a dagger into the battlefield. It hits Donkiel in the calf, making the warrior lose his balance. The player falls to the ground, not understanding what's happening. And when he looks up, the rogue is standing in front of him like the Grim Reaper himself. Donkeel's eyes burn with rage as he curses the traitor. Ilwu simply returns the gesture with a gentle smile. The fallen warrior asks the rogue if someone ordered him to do this, and the answer is no. The group was just being used after some background investigation. Then Ilwu confirms with Donkeel whether this is his last life, and the warrior just stares at him apprehensive. Donkeel pleads and tells the traitor he can have everything, even kill him, but at least spare Ion. Ilwu says that unfortunately that won't be possible. Besides, the items that would drop from their bodies would be nothing but trash anyway. Then the boss charges at the warrior with its mouth wide open, grabs him by the neck and shakes him, eliminating the warrior once and for all. While the creature feeds on Donkeel, the writing on the great tombstone behind the werewolf glows and Ilwu begins chanting a ritual. It required the sacrifice of 3 people to decode the moonstone. The rogue watches the ritual as it continues. Coming from another tunnel exit, a young man smiles at the scene. Sunhoon comments loudly that in the end, the thief really did betray everyone, and Ilwu tells him to stop pretending like he knows everything, because he's next. The protagonist asks if sacrificing 3 people isn't already enough to complete the ritual. Surprised that a mere warrior learned linguistics, the rogue says the boy must be rich, and Sunhoon asks if this is really the time for small talk. Ilwu admits he knew something was off about our little villain and charges at him with his dagger. Dashing toward the boy, the ninja uses a skill that multiplies his blades. The protagonist easily cancels the attack with his sword and dodges the follow-up strike. Sunhoon recognizes the opponent's style. It'll be hard to defeat him head-on, and it'll be a pain if he revives. So Sunhoon uses his stepping skill to reach the enemy's blind spot, slashing the rogue's shoulder with his sword. Ilwu clutches the wound and wonders how the poison isn't all through the protagonist's body by now. The traitor considers maybe the boy didn't eat the soup, but he definitely saw him eat it. Sunhoon charges in without worrying about the opponent's confusion. Once again, Ilwu uses the skill that multiplies his blades. But again, the swordsman uses his steps to find the best path to the enemy. Dropping vertically, the protagonist slices through the rogue's throat with his sword. Ilwu coughs red while clutching his neck. But before the enemy can die for good, Sunhoon grabs him by the hood and offers the player to the wolf pup for a snack. The rogue ends up tasting his own poison several times, and Ilwu's body vanishes as if he were teleporting. Sunhoon realizes it was the rogue's first life and hopes he doesn't run into him again. Then he walks over to the group's 2 remaining members. Only one more person is needed to complete the sacrifice. Sunhoon quickly chooses Ion, since it would be good to keep a connection with a ranker mage like Ellie. The protagonist places the unconscious girl in front of the giant werewolf, and soon she'll reunite with her beloved inside a canine's stomach, discovering it was also the girl's first life. But the poison will make sure she doesn't remember anything, so if Sunhoon bumps into her again, he just needs to pretend he's another victim. Then the crescent moon werewolf evolves into the full moon werewolf. The creature grows much larger, but since it devoured Donkeel's poison final life, it should be running on low energy. With things as they are, Sunhoon slices the creature to pieces, ending the fight in the blink of an eye. After defeating the full moon werewolf and touching the moonstone, the mission is finally complete. But there's a detail about this mission that almost no one knows. If you touch the moonstone with the ketchup of the full moon werewolf on your hands, a secret door appears. The full moon stone splits in 2, revealing a metal door. And beyond the door is a chamber filled with multiple sarcophagi. When the mission is completed with low-level linguistic skills, the interpretation is wrong, reducing the reward. But when the player completes it with advanced linguistics, the chamber is filled with sarcophagi of other men. In total, there are 50 sarcophagi containing the creature's bodies. Both the werewolf heart and the werewolf fang are worth good money. Sunhoon goes from tomb to tomb, opening each one, and removing the valuable parts of the monsters. After dealing with 50 werewolves, the protagonist's sword proficiency skyrockets. As much as the boy has to betray and resort to dirty tricks, in the end it's the only way to grow stronger. Then the young man returns to the fallen mage and gives an antidote to the poisoned woman. Within seconds, Ellie wakes up. She jumps to her feet and asks Sunhoon what happened. He explains that Ilwu betrayed the group, and when the protagonist arrived, the archer and the warrior had already perished. Ellie is devastated upon learning the outcome of the mission. Then she thanks our boy for saving her life, and obviously, the faker replies that there's no need to thank him. He just did the right thing. And the woman says that's exactly why she's thanking him. There aren't many good people like him. Taking the chance, Sunhoon makes his move and asks the mage to join his team, catching Ellie by surprise. During the night, you can hear someone cursing from inside a suburban building. A man holds an aluminum bat while yelling at a girl who's beaten and lying on the floor to bring her mother back. The girl is the result of an arranged marriage, and her mother found a way to escape the situation, leaving her behind. Then one fine day, while everyone was asleep, the girl left a piece of burning coal beside the man who had drunk himself unconscious inside a sealed room, causing the man to suffocate and pass away, and no one dared to suspect his daughter. Thus, the girl realized that as long as she acted naturally, people would always believe her. Meanwhile, a woman, upon entering the mission world, seduced and killed every man who fell for her, earning the title of Cowardly Survivor. She already knew the secret of the Moonlight Cave and also that the rogue had poisoned the food. The mage lay on the ground pretending to have been poisoned, waiting for the right moment. But she watched as the member she thought was the most clueless in the group took down the one she thought was the smartest. And after that, the boy still had the audacity to calmly try to deceive her. Ellie played along and pretended to believe it. She had never met anyone like Sun-hoon and wanted to get to know him better. Fascinated by the boy's shameless wickedness, the mage gladly accepted to join the team. Meanwhile, in a castle floating in the void of the universe, one of the gods complains that the people chosen for the game are too weak and that it's going to take too long. The god Asura scolds Loki, saying he won't tolerate his rude attitude anymore, but the old man from the beginning says it's fine. The old man says that if people are falling short, then the gods just need to give them a taste of how weak they really are. So he suggests a resistance mission at S-rank level for absolutely all players. A gray-skinned god with demonic eyes says that if they do that, no one will be left in the game world. But the old man assures them he'll make it work and asks who the other gods are rooting for. The radiant being is rooting for Ellie, Asura from Yuhan, or Mei Renee. And Loki's bet is on Yu Sun-hoon catching the attention of the other gods. A fire deity recalls that he completed the tutorial in record time, and Satan asks why him and not Claymore Jr. from Brazil. Claymore Jr., the most notorious player in the city dedicated to Brazil, is completely evil, enjoying every massacre. Loki isn't like Satan. He prefers someone like Sun-hoon, a petty and shameless villain who only thinks about his own immediate gain. After the meeting, the gods place their bets and proceed with a new game update. A system window with the update notes appears for all players, creating a general sense of outrage. A worried man runs to his leader to ask if he saw the update, and Nuven tells him not to worry because the text said it would be balanced, and reassures his subordinate by saying that if the goal were to eliminate everyone, they'd simply do it, not create an entire mission. More importantly, Muhan is excited about a type of reward he might get from the S-rank mission. And in the city center plaza, the big fair is going on as always. Inside a tavern, our protagonist watches the chaos happening outside. Sun-hoon is much more concerned with the two boxes he received. One is a gift for reaching rank 21. The other is a gift from the god watching him closely, Loki. The protagonist understands the ranking reward, but has no idea what the one from Loki is. The name sounds familiar, like the guy from the Avengers. So Sun-hoon taps to open the gift from the deity, revealing a rare passive skill that makes it harder for people not to believe his lies. The protagonist finds the skill kind of useless since people already believe his lies, but hey, better than nothing. Someone pulls the chair in front of the young man and he smiles. Ellie confirms with Sun-hoon that he only needs one more level C mission to advance his class. The mage already advanced and became a witch's apprentice. Then she starts listing some of the missions he could take to move forward. But our little schemer already did his research and is going after a spiritualist named Yu Charon. Large groups are awful when it comes to dividing all the rewards, but in general, they're much safer. The boy tells the mage he has a better idea and asks her to follow him. The woman simply agrees. In another part of the city, the spiritualist Yu Charon asks her wide group if everyone is ready. When Sun-hoon and Ellie arrive to ask if there's a spot on the team, the spiritualist says yes and asks to check both of their statuses. Charon is surprised by the window that opens in front of her. The redhead notes that Ellie is a mage and is impressed by Sun-hoon's stats. But the spiritualist noticed that the boy is trying to raise his class level, so he's certainly a ranker. And the protagonist feels a bit rattled for being caught in the act. Either way, the boy is much stronger than most of the group and even better. She's happy to have two rankers on the team, which surprises the young man a bit. Sun-hoon looks around trying to find the other ranker. He spots a figure in a black cloak just a few meters away. Very little of the hooded person's face is visible, but both we and the protagonist can recognize the peculiar gaze of a certain ponytailed girl. Yu Charon yells that the mission is about to begin, and Sun-hoon was about to ask for a moment, but it was too late. Everyone was teleported to the location of the C-rank escort mission. Ellie notices the protagonist's strange behavior and asks if he's okay. But before he can answer, the hooded person approaches, saying it's been a while since they last met. Sun-hoon pretends to turn into a microwave and Ellie bursts out laughing. But out of nowhere, a katana appears at the boy's neck. The cloaked woman says it's good to see him even under these circumstances. She'd like to fight him at least once before the update mission. Then the swordswoman starts to pull back her hood. Sun-hoon had managed to avoid running into her until now. Mei Renee reveals her face after challenging the protagonist in the beautiful outdoor setting of the escort mission. The protagonist asks Mei Renee why she keeps tailing him, and she fires back, asking why he won't just fight her once. The young woman confesses she knows Sun-hoon is skilled enough to surpass her. With the boldest face in the world, our little villain pretends she just said the most absurd thing ever. Mei Renee doesn't understand why Sun-hoon hates fighting so much and asks if he doesn't find her worthy. He says the truth is, he's weak. Fortunately, Ellie interrupts the drowned king and asks if they can walk while they talk because the carriage is moving and they're falling behind. The protagonist suggests to his rival that they walk for now, and she agrees. As Sung-hoon and Ellie walk ahead of Mei Renee, the mage asks who she is, and he replies that she's the demon sword herself. And the woman loses it, asking if he's talking about the top-ranked swordswoman, and he just confirms, spooked. Ellie runs straight to Mei Renee, leaving Sung-hoon confused. The mage literally asks the woman for an autograph and gets rejected. Ellie comes back all sad that she said no, and Sung-hoon says that's just how she is, then adds more. That she seems normal, but is a total battle junkie who doesn't care about what's happening around her, and Mei Renee says she can hear them from there. And what was supposed to be an easy mission will now be 10 days of hell. Leading the way, Charon tells everyone to get ready because a horde of orcs is coming. The spiritualist sends Mei Renee to the front and Yu Sung-hoon to the right flank. And the orcs arrive full of malice in their hearts. Several players charge toward the horde with battle cries. But something happens too fast for them to notice. Mei Renee's shadow dances through the orcs, and she eliminates them all in seconds. The whole group is in shock at seeing her live. Even Sung-hoon, who already knew she was strong. Our little villain thinks it's not safe to get close to her and decides to use alternative methods. Mei Renee wipes a bit of sweat from her bangs because the sun is hot. Then Charon announces it's time for a snack break. A tomato soup is served in a wooden bowl, and Sung-hoon asks the spiritualist who's serving the food if she shouldn't rest too. Charon is shaken that everyone else grabbed food and ran, but our boy is considerate. The leader thanks him and asks him to take her place for a bit. Watching the scene, Mei Renee swoops in and praises Sung-hoon's noble warrior spirit. The protagonist tells the swordswoman that she's incredible, and with the bare minimum effort, she surpasses him instantly. The woman blushes and says he's just flattering her. And Sung-hoon seizes the moment of distraction. He poisons a bowl of food and hands it to Mei Renee, who's flustered about holding up the line. And that's it. When the time comes to fight, the poison will have spread, and he'll be able to win. The protagonist watches the young woman sitting, holding her soup. Then she grabs a spoon to take a little taste and immediately realizes something's wrong. And to no one's surprise, Mei Renee has so many passive skills against poison that she neutralizes it while drinking the soup. The swordswoman approaches Sung-hoon, and he asks if she wants more food, but she says she wants to talk to him. Mei Renee confronts the protagonist and tells him the soup was poisoned. He's surprised, but for different reasons. Then the woman explains that the orcs must have poisoned it when no one was looking and said she'll patrol the area. Sung-hoon feels surprised and frustrated, but still relieved that she didn't suspect him. Ellie watches and wonders if she should help the protagonist, because even for him, facing Mei Renee will be complicated. The mage walks up to Renee and asks where her big sister is going, and the swordswoman reminds her they're the same age. The blonde asks if she doesn't like being called that and makes a sad face, and the ranker, feeling bad, says it's fine to call her that. Then Ellie gets super happy, clings to Mei Renee's arm, and asks if she wants to sleep with her. Oh. The mage takes advantage of Mei Renee's embarrassment and casts a weakness curse on her back. 4 of her passives detect the curse, instantly negating 56% of the spell, and Mei Renee is startled and asks Ellie to tell Sung-hoon something. The mage looks confused and asks what, and the swordswoman explains that someone just cast a curse on her. There must be someone on their tail. Ellie is completely shocked because part of her skill's description says no one should know the curse was cast. Sharon overhears the conversation and joins in, saying that there were never monsters using poison or curses in that area, but they should stay alert just in case. Sung-hoon shows up looking guilty. Mei Renee tells the boy that even if a monster horde appears, even if she's poisoned and cursed, she'll still make a point to fight him. The protagonist decides there's no more room for excuses, so the boy proposes they exchange only 10 blows each, since delaying the mission any further would be bad. She agrees on the condition that he promises to fight her again after the mission. Sung-hoon agrees but says there are too many people watching, and asks to go somewhere more private. What she doesn't know is that the protagonist already has a place in mind. Once they arrive, the boy tries to calm himself, reminding himself that he's ranker number 21, and even if she's strong, he can handle 10 hits. The swordswoman announces the start of the battle, and her shadow shoots toward her opponent. It didn't even take half a second for Sung-hoon to be face-to-face with Mei Renee. The protagonist activates his footwork skill and dodges 3 consecutive strikes. Renee observes that the boy is leaving a lot of openings and wonders if it's on purpose or if he's really just weak. But Sung-hoon's plan is to lure her into a trap he set earlier when she wasn't looking. Except he failed to consider that in this fight, he wouldn't have time to think. The protagonist manages to block the attack, but ends up dropping his sword. He loses his balance and falls into his own trap. However, while trying to regain his footing, he accidentally kicks the back of Mei Renee's knee, and his luck didn't run out there. When his opponent was about to fall, she flails and ends up landing a perfect palm strike to Mei Renee's chin. The ranker is knocked out by the blow. Sung-hoon doesn't know what to say, think, or feel. And it doesn't take long for Mei Renee to wake up. The girl gets up with difficulty, and is completely devastated when she realizes she lost. The protagonist offers a hand and asks if she's okay, but she just asks if he learned hand-to-hand combat. Sung-hoon was about to say no, but remembered he does have that skill. Humiliated, Mei Renee thinks about how he naturally bent her knee while dodging, how everything seems so intentional. and starts crying, realizing that between the two of them, she was the arrogant one. The girl asks if she can ask one more question even though she lost, and Sung-hoon tells her to ask anything. Then Rinne asks why he ended the fight with his fists instead of his sword. The boy replies, confused, that he used his hands because he dropped his sword. Rinne makes up a story in her head that Sung-hoon used his fists to avoid really hurting her, while she just went at him full force. The girl abruptly turns away, announcing that today she lost, probably turning to hide her tears. The protagonist says that's a misunderstanding, and Rinne says the winner shouldn't comfort the loser. Then she says she'll keep training after what she learned today, but that she wants a rematch in the future. The girl walks away, leaving behind a completely confused Sung-hoon, wondering how he made her cry. Aside from the battle, nothing major happened on the 8th day, and the escort mission ended well too. After the fight, Rinne started avoiding Sung-hoon, just like he always avoids her. Upon arriving in the city, a system screen announced the end of the mission, and the crowd celebrated. And before disappearing into the portal, Rinne gave the protagonist a nod. Sung-hoon thinks that at least now things should calm down a bit. Then an old lady asks him to wait a moment. The elder talks about how the young man helped people during the escort, doing several tasks that weren't his responsibility. The boy looks at her, thinking how none of that was done with good intentions. Then the lady expresses gratitude for her goods having arrived safely. Our little villain doesn't know where she's going with this and just says he's glad for her. Then the elderly woman hands him a red bottle. Sung-hoon instantly recognizes the rare item as fermion extract, a catalyst used for certain types of magic, and finally understands why Yu Charon was helping so many NPCs. Ellie grabs Sung-hoon's arm, asking if she's getting the item as a gift, and he tells her to quit with a cute face. Then the girl gets really mad and asks if he could at least sell it to her at a discount. The boy thinks it over and concludes she actually needs it more. He hands the potion to the mage, asking if she likes the item that much. She holds the bottle like it's a baby animal and says of course, since it lets her use most of her spells and they need to upgrade their arsenals. Sung-hoon realizes she's right. Before going monster hunting to get stronger, they should focus on updating their gear. The items on his body are, at best, usable. But first he needs to level up his class. The NPC is happy to see the boy and asks if he remembers him. Sung-hoon says of course he remembers Father Philip. Then the priest shows him the classes he can choose from without worry. The protagonist immediately eliminates the adventurer class, since it's bad for close combat. He notices that the samurai class is being recommended to him. Philip says that if he's concerned, he could pay 3 times more to change his class path entirely. The boy hates even thinking about the money. Soon, the boy will have to face an S-rank difficulty mission. Most rankers get wiped out at B rank, so he needs something flexible. So Sung-hoon chooses the Enlightened Swordsman class as his evolution. The priest says that the young man's command has been received and congratulates him on walking the path of enlightenment. Then the protagonist's body begins to glow as he evolves, receiving several new skills and traits. Sung-hoon is satisfied with the result, and Philip explains that evolution grants exclusive features that match the player. Whether the protagonist will swim or sink in the sand, there's no turning back now. He needs to study his new skills. Above the inn, there's a starless sky. Anxious, Sung-hoon can't sleep. The S-rank mission begins tomorrow. Then a glow in the dark room catches his attention. Jerry teleports beside the protagonist's bed, saying he'd like to talk, but there's no time. The supporter starts explaining that the S-rank mission will have players possess the body of an NPC to help balance weaker players. Sung-hoon asks if that means he won't be able to use his skills, and Jerry reassures him that no, all of his abilities will be transferred to the NPC. Hero-level NPCs will also randomly appear. If the players manage to gain their help, the mission will be easier. The gods thought of everything before designing the challenge. In the upcoming mission, called The Dawn That Cuts Through the Darkness, players will go to a world where they must defeat the classic Demon King. Divided into 3 areas, weaker players go to the dungeon of the Evil Army. Above it is the Demon King's castle, where mid-level warriors are sent. And finally, the rankers go to the battlefield against the Demon King. The 3 areas are connected, and the failure of one can affect the others. The protagonist then asks if the mission's success depends on a group effort. Jerry confirms and adds that a legendary item will be revealed, as well as the chance to gain an extra life. Sung-hoon becomes very interested. The deity says their time is up and teleports out of the protagonist's room. A new day dawns in the world of the battle against the Demon King. Sung-hoon opens his eyes, determined to analyze his surroundings. A flicker of his reflection makes him notice a mirror in the room. But something feels terribly wrong. He has become every guy's dream, a rich and beautiful girl. No matter how hard our little villain searches, he can't find it. It's just not there. He realizes that his character's stats are dependent on his passive abilities, and overall the stats are geared toward magic use. Well, at least he doesn't have to be on the front lines, but he does have some useful sword skills, though for some reason among his abilities are sewing, throwing tantrums, table etiquette, and all sorts of random things. The system announces the start of an E-rank mission called Runaway Princess. Princess Sung-hoon hears enemies approaching from behind. A dark night and 3 skeletons threaten our girl. It's the first time the protagonist sees either monster type, so he's not sure if he could win. But at least the princess has a sword. It's not a longsword, but it'll do. The Dark Knight calls the girl a human and coldly tells her to die. The knight's voice causes her to be paralyzed for 10 seconds and have all stats reduced. Princess Sun-hoon is frozen like a statue and certain she's about to die. The young man even gives up in his final moments. Outside the castle, floating in the void of the universe, the frustrated screams of a deity watching the mission through a crystal ball can be heard. No player was supposed to possess the princess, as she's the central NPC of the story. The princess NPC would normally run and escape, but Sun-hoon would never just flee, and maybe the debuff will kill him. If the princess dies, everyone in the mission fails. However, the crystal ball shows a twist. The princess has an ability called Polarity Shift, where all of her dozens of random noble skills transform into combat abilities. Her Majesty Sun-hoon laughs at her own luck. Now she could fight using various types of dance, and she also has a persistence buff that increases the effectiveness of all her skills. A skeleton attacks Princess Sun-hoon, but the young woman dodges as if it were second nature. She draws the rapier from her waist. The protagonist realizes she has so much proficiency that the skills trigger like muscle memory. Then she flips over the skeleton, and its head goes flying. The agility in the princess's footwork is unbelievable. However, Princess Sun-hoon is still outnumbered, so she activates Talisman Art and commands the School of Fire to enter the stage. The skeletons are visibly shaken, which makes the protagonist realize the creatures have some intelligence. One of the skeletons jumps on her because of her habit of overthinking mid-battle, but the princess escapes naturally dancing a waltz and spins into a diagonal sword strike, sharing the skeleton bones completely. Princess Sun-hoon thinks about how it ended up being useful to have watched Ilwoo closely. Then our girl vaporizes the skeletons. Now only the Dark Knight remains, and he looks more than ready. The creature stares at her with pure hatred and charges, swinging his sword from over his shoulder. The princess takes a small step back and a little hop upward. The Dark Knight is surprised by his opponent, but the princess's flowing white hair completes a ballet pose alongside the knight. Princess Sun-hoon smiles at the armor, and the monster gets furious that she's mocking him. Then one of the young woman's skills triggers, making them both dance a professional waltz. The Dark Knight asks her to stop the bullying, and the princess decides to grant his request. Girl Sun-hoon steps forward with her sword and pierces the knight's armor at the ribs, activating a humble skill called Bomb. The armor explodes from the inside out, becoming a massive ball of fire in the air. The protagonist is surprised by the strength of this skill. It wasn't supposed to be this powerful. The Runaway Princess mission ends and our girl receives 8 mission points. Sun-hoon is startled by his own princess voice and decides he should get used to the body as quickly as possible. According to Jerry's explanation, the princess is in the advanced dungeon, where only rankers appear. It makes no sense for him to have become the princess in a mission to rescue the princess. She was supposed to be an important NPC. The protagonist opens the system window again. In addition to the main mission and the one he just completed, there's a third A-rank mission called Runic Blade. Outside, someone loudly comments that the mission to rescue the princess was completed solo. The princess looks toward the voices and sees 3 people who are probably players. However, along with the group arrives an NPC, the loyal knight of Princess Serena, Shin Woongram, and the protagonist realizes that he's one of the heroic NPCs Jerry mentioned. The players surround Serena like she's a celebrity, asking if she's a player too and what her name is. The princess's knight is completely outraged by the lack of respect and threatens the commoners with an intimidating skill. The guys are stunned that the NPC has already evolved to class level 3. If they misbehave, he could kill them. So everyone bows before the princess. And Sun-hoon gets the brilliant idea to take advantage of being the princess to pretend he's an NPC and control the players. That way he can easily lead the mission. The protagonist decides to embrace the role, and now he is a strong and independent woman, a noblewoman, a princess. After the boy accepts the situation, Serena's body activates passives like royal dignity posture and traditional Floran Empire etiquette. Then the princess points her rapier at the players and asks how they dare offend the princess. One of the players begs to be forgiven just this once. Sun-hoon is pleased with how imposing the princess's voice is and tells the players that normally insulting the princess is an unforgivable crime, but she's very concerned about the Demon King, so she'll let it go. While the players thank her on their knees, the protagonist realizes how much power his position provides. Due to lack of exploration, the princess doesn't have much information at the moment other than that the people in the labyrinth were scattered in a surprise attack. But asking directly would raise suspicion that he's a player. So the princess tells the knight she's worried about the outcome of an event she should know about. And the NPC assures her there's nothing to worry about, the warriors are strong, and the mission is going well. Princess Sun-hoon remembers that players must have received bodies equivalent to a level 2 evolution, and heroic NPCs are rare. Following another train of thought, the protagonist decides to check the Runic Blade mission, which hasn't opened yet. Passed down from generation to generation, the Runic Blade is a sword that reappears on the planet during times of crisis. To awaken it, the princess must sacrifice herself, and the protagonist does not like that part one bit. The princess nearly faints from the stress, but the knight prevents her from falling. Woongram asks if the young lady is alright, and she replies that she's just feeling a little dizzy. Then Sung-hoon decides to think positively that even in the worst-case scenario, where he gets dragged to the afterlife, he still earns 10,000 mission points, and he concludes that the sword at his waist must be the runic blade. If the sword evolved, that means defeating creatures charges it. But the 4 enemies he defeated only gave 13 out of the 100,000 points needed. So there must be a way to complete the mission without giving up his life. Night Moon warns a group of people approaching that if they come closer, he'll attack them. Then a voice speaks from within the group. Among the people emerges an old mage with a huge beard. The old man greets the great Woom and says he expected him to still be alive. Surprised, the knight recognizes Count Hansen. The old mage expresses relief to see the princess safe. The players who came with the mage start asking if she's also a heroic NPC, prompting a tall man to apologize for the group. Kang Mu-hen explains that the players are shaken because they've just come from a dungeon. The protagonist remembers he needs to stay calm, so Mu-hen doesn't realize he's not an NPC. To cover up, he asks to borrow the mage's wisdom, and the Count explains there are 2 options: search for the people who were scattered, which is safer for the players but riskier for the mission, or advance toward the center of the dungeon. Even though the dungeon contains several strong monsters, the path to the center is straightforward. Then a giant system screen appears with a mission: regroup or advance, where the first option has lower difficulty than the second. Kang Mu-hen concludes that if a system window popped up, they have a choice. And since this is S-rank difficulty, safety should always come first. The big guy was about to try to convince everyone to take the easier path, but Serena decided they'll go with the harder one. Mu-hen tries to argue, and the princess asks if he intends to disobey her. The knight clears his throat, reminding the warrior that it's dangerous to go against the princess, and wonders why give options if they can't actually choose. Kang Mu-hen kneels before the princess and apologizes for the lack of consideration. So it's decided they will proceed with the advanced difficulty of the mission. The mission is not only safer for Sung-hoon, who stays in the rear, but also because the knight Woongram will be responsible for protecting him as the princess. The group keeps growing and more monsters start appearing. Before anyone else can act, Kang Mu-hen eliminates the enemies in their path, quickly gaining experience. Princess Sung-hoon laments that she has to actively participate in order to break the sword's seal. Looking at the battle, the protagonist gets an idea. Serena asks Count Hansen if he can cast enchantments, and he says yes, but at the moment, support is more urgently needed. The princess orders the mage to obey and conjure a bomb floating in the void. Hansen decides it's best to listen to the princess and agrees. He casts the explosion spell variant. Princess Sung-hoon draws her sword and absorbs the mage's spell with the runic blade, using the talisman from the School of Bombs, which activates the opposite polarity skill. And finally, she uses archery-related skills to precisely launch 7 bombs in one sword movement, directly hitting the monsters. Kang Mu-hen throws a tantrum and asks who stole him. The princess says she was the one who eliminated the monsters. He asks why she did that, and she says he looked surrounded and she decided to help. Then Serena asks if he's unhappy with her gesture, and he has to swallow his pride. Sung-hoon celebrates that not even the leader of Hetefa can question him. If he's not discovered, he'll become the leader of the S-rank mission. Then Mu-hen tries to convince the princess not to fight, because if anything happens to her, the group's morale will plummet. But Serena won't fall for that. There's no way an aristocrat would cower while everyone else is fighting for the greater good. Woongram even cries with emotion at the girl's nobility, poor guy. Sukuna, pouting, decides he'll kill the princess at the first chance he gets, while the protagonist is going all in for a massive win. Then Sung Serena tells him to advance, as she'll be providing long-range support. Looks like Loki gave wings to a snake. Farther ahead, the castle's darkness emanates a dense miasma. The group is affected by fatigue, and the protagonist notices they're moving forward pretty fast. One of Mu-hen's subordinates tells everyone to stop. There's a trap up ahead. The guy pulls screwdrivers out of his pocket and starts fiddling with the gears. When he finishes, he comments aloud that disarming the trap earned him 30 mission points. With that extra information, Serena decides he needs to start drafting a plan. Elsewhere in the dungeon, warriors who haven't yet joined the main group are battling a horde of skeletons. At the front of that group is Mei Renee, who effortlessly eliminates the mid-tier monsters. She concludes she doesn't even need to activate any third evolution skills to clean them up. Then some jack skeletons in armor show up, trying to block the player's path. Renee prepares to face the fitness skeletons and easily predicts the enemy's movements, dodging attacks from all directions like it's second nature. The skeletons practically start sweating in panic. Mai Renee takes position, crossing her blades. The demon sword slashes through the enemies in a single movement, and the crowd that was just watching starts showering her with praise. Renee thinks that even so, she's still not on Yu Sung-hoon's level and plans to formally request a battle after the mission. A cold breeze brushes over the princess's body, a danger the protagonist doesn't even know he's in, sends chills down his spine. Princess Sung-hoon asks Count Hansen how far they are, and the mage says he can't say, since there are no records of the labyrinth anymore. Unfortunately, monsters have taken over this part of the castle, but now with the soldier and the princess, they won't stand a chance. Someone at the front asks the group to stop. The passage ahead leads to a void portal. Mu-hen asks the subordinate if the group isn't enough to get through. The woman replies no, because beyond the portal is a monster she's never seen before. Two mages hide to peek through the portal. They recognize the creatures as a lich and an infernal knight, and Kang Mu then asks if they're strong. Count Hansen confirms that they're very powerful. They're two of the strongest undead beings in existence. With the group's current strength, they don't stand a chance. The warrior suggests gathering more people before advancing, but the princess says there's no need to rush. For if the group stays where it is, it won't be long until another strike squad joins them. The two stare at each other in silence. Muhan is already climbing the walls, wanting to explode at the aristocrat. As ordered by the princess, the group sets up camp and lights a fire. Kang Mu-hin thinks of ways to get rid of the annoying girl. Confronting her directly isn't a good idea since the princess has too much influence. The best strategy would be to slowly persuade her. Then the warrior notices a fine candlelit table near the camp. Sitting at the table is Princess Sung-hoon, enjoying a filet mignon in the middle of a dungeon. I don't know if he's too into the role, but he even complains about the food. The mage says he's not a professional chef. Serena watches the warrior approach and asks if he wants something. Mu-hin just looks at the royal at her little table and says, no, nothing. In the end, the dinner ends up serving as a power display by the princess. The ultimate goal in the mission world is to become the next god. And Sung-hoon, more than anyone, knows how useless he can be. So the question is how to handle a situation where he can't be on top. The answer is simple. Just pull everyone else down. It might be crude and dirty, but it's effective. The first step is to act like a perfect princess. If necessary, he would eliminate everyone in the room without a shred of guilt. And if everything goes wrong, he'll take his own life so no one can benefit from the runic blade. The people watching the portal are alarmed when they see someone has started the battle. Mu-hin says it makes no sense. No one passed by them. Purple smoke rises from a magical explosion. They discover that the other strike team had initiated the fight. Apparently, there were two other entrances to the chamber where the monsters were. Mu-hin rallies everyone to flank the enemies. In the chaos, the demon sword Mai Rene is fighting several monsters at once. Kang Mu-hin pulls the spear from his back and prepares to throw the weapon. He hurls the blade at the infernal knight like a cannonball. The creature is knocked backward and drops to its knees. But to the surprise of the leader of Hetefa, the big skeleton is just slightly annoyed. That's when Mu-hin realizes he's in serious trouble. The infernal soldier charges toward Mu-hin. He conjures a second spear and throws the blade again at the enemy, landing it square in the ribs, pinning the monster to the wall. But this time, instead of waiting, Mu-hin rushes forward. The undead regains its posture and locks eyes with him, landing a meteor-like punch in the warrior's stomach, and Kang Mu-hin hits the ground hard near the impact. The warrior thought his NPC body would make things easy, but he was dead wrong. Then Princess Sung-hoon orders Woongram to the front line with the other warriors and asks Count Hansen to contain the lich. The heroic NPCs charge into the player's battlefield. Woongram clears a path and reduces the risks, while Hansen distracts the eternal undead. Yusurina stares down the enemies after switching her focus to the rapier, and launches 4 bombs from the runic blade, landing them directly on half of the infernal knight. However, it doesn't do much, and at this rate, they're all going to die. Meanwhile, even behind the rear guard, 2 long-range players discuss the battle, which doesn't look promising. The archer suggests pulling back and observing for now. The mage asks what the point is. If everyone dies, they won't be able to complete the mission. But the long-haired archer explains to his friend how to earn points without killing the demon king. Then the bespectacled mage understands the strategy and starts to get interested in the plan. Yusurina, who had been listening to everything, doesn't like the player's attitude one bit. The princess draws her sword and walks up to the cowards, who don't really understand what she wants. Without warning, the protagonist lunges and takes the archer's head clean off mid-screen. The mage instantly conjures a magic circle to protect himself from the crazed princess. It's useless. His head flies off just the same. Just to be sure, she brings one of the heads to show the warriors in the heat of battle. Princess Sung-hoon explains that 2 traitors tried to run away, and this example in her hand is the fate of all who attempt to abandon the cause. The princess's royal dignity passive and the lies passive granted by Loki add 100% credibility to the protagonist's speech. The warriors realize they have no choice, and overall everyone is left speechless. But Mu-hin decides to support the princess's warning and says he won't forget the face of anyone who tries to run. In the end, the battle continues even more fiercely. The protagonist's threat ended up boosting team morale, even if that wasn't the intention. Yusurina gives the signal to Count Hansen. The mage instantly understands what it's about. Once again, the two combine their explosive powers and temporarily stun the lich. The battle against the infernal knight seems more difficult. The monster is about to advance through the corridor when the creature notices a man in a kimono descending from the sky. The man in the kimono punches the infernal knight so hard the monster bends on impact, leaving the warriors in the battle stunned. The fighter says he was summoned in a hurry, so he's in a bad mood and wants to end this quickly. Yusurina wonders if the guy is a player. Count Hansen calls the man in the kimono Soldier Yihan, catching the protagonist off guard. Yin wastes no time and leaps again at the infernal knight, splitting the creature in one brutal strike. Princess Sung-hoon assesses the situation. Now that the soldier has arrived, the battle ends within moments. The chamber is left in complete ruins after the fight, and the group regathers to decide the next steps. Kim Yi-hyun suggests that the princess convince the heroes to stay at the front, but Yu Baeku argues that if most people stay safe, they won't be accused of hiding mission points. Yi-hyun says there's no way they could be that stupid, but Baeku insists they're definitely stupid enough. Then the warrior suggests organizing only among those who have evolved 3 times. The mage asks if that's not too risky, and Yi-hyun reminds him that the soldier is now part of their team. Then Princess Sung-hoon decides to call Yi-hyun over for a chat, but he completely ignores the girl. Our princess is outraged that the man dared to ignore him. Soldier Yi-hyun decides the group has rested long enough. It's time to move on. Baeku tells the fighter that if he's so confident, he shouldn't mind being on the front line. Yi-hyun says he's fine with that, but doing so would mean the players lose their precious points. That's when the players realize he's not an NPC and someone asks who the hell he is. But he grabs the person by the shirt and tells them to speak with respect. Yusurina has no idea what to think about the soldier, and Mai Rene attacks from the flank. Yi-hyun catches the demon's sword midair with just 2 fingers, halting its wielder in midair. Yi-hyun presses the blade between his middle and index fingers. Mai Rene is shocked that he blocked such a fast surprise attack with just his fingers. Before now, no one besides Sung-hoon had been able to face her sword technique head-on. She realizes the soldier is on a whole other level. The demon sword strikes again, with her right sword that stings like a bee, and her left sword that floats like a butterfly, spinning like a hurricane toward Yi-hyun. The fighter admits she's pretty fast, and the light in Mai Rene's eyes meets the soldier's fist. Once again, a solid hit. She collapses before the enemy. Yi-hyun tells Mai Rene that her technique lacks depth and is far too raw, and that she makes too many unnecessary movements while attacking. Every time she changes direction, she loses her stance's flow. But considering it's only been 4 months since the mission world began, that is, he corrects himself and says that given it's only been 4 months, she's actually remarkably talented. The player remains silent while staring at him. The people around want to know who he is to be able to take down a ranker like she was nothing. Another reckless guide who doesn't have even a fifth of Mai Rene's speed thinks it's a good idea to attack the soldier. Guyan looks at the player like he's a cockroach, and the pressure in his gaze is overwhelming. The reckless player ends up frozen in place, like a frog surrounded by a snake. Even the onlookers are shocked by the intensity of his stare. It's an unprecedented killing intent. Then the soldier just clicks his tongue, deciding to reveal to the group of players that he isn't one of them, but also not an NPC, and that in fact he is a god, completely breaking the brains of everyone watching. Yi-hyun confesses that he dropped everything he was doing to help them, and expects gratitude for it. And Yu-hyun is the first to say something. He accuses the god of kidnapping them all and dragging them into this world. If the players suffer every day, it's his fault. But Yi-hyun only lands 1 punch on the big guy's face. The soldier reveals that he didn't drag anyone into this mess. He's just part of the staff. The players think that's just as bad and attack him as a group. However, Princess Sung-hoon remains still, just like Mai Rene, who only watches. The god says he doesn't plan to kill the players, but he'd love to make them want to die. One by one, the players took a single punch to the face, with no time to react, until Yi-hyun gets tired and plows through them, knocking them down like bowling pins, even when they're lying on the ground. The god keeps showing the consequences of rebellion. Yi-hyun asks if that's enough, because if he does more, he'll end up killing the players. Since no one says anything, the fighter concludes that they finally agree. The beating made it clear enough that complaining won't help. So Yi-hyun resumes the mission and asks Count Hansen to open the passage. The mage agrees and approaches a door about 7 meters tall. Then he asks the princess to come closer. Looking at the door, Serena sees her family crest shining, causing the giant stone doors to open. Count Hansen explains that since the dungeon was managed by the Empire, the doors only respond to members of the Imperial family. The protagonist realizes he now needs to act carefully, because he knows nothing about the god, and it's too dangerous to provoke the players in their current state. Yin moves toward the door and says it's time to go, but several people protest, saying they have no reason to follow him. The god says he doesn't care. Whoever wants to come can come. To most people's surprise, some decide to follow without hesitation. Those people are the princess, the 2 NPCs, and even Choi Cheol-hyun, the guy who earlier felt like a frog, and Mai Rene, who follows right behind the group, making Mu-hyun question her. The demonic sword simply says standing still wouldn't help anything. With that simple argument, Mu-hyun decides to follow the soldier, and his subordinate points out that if they follow, the attack groups will be split again. But the leader of Hatefa says they don't have time to convince everyone, and like it or not, they should follow, at least for now. Yevon takes the lead of the now smaller group. Some creatures appear along the way, but the god eliminates them in a matter of seconds. Princess Sung-hoon observes that all of Yi-hyun's attacks are self-defense techniques, but they're still incredibly destructive, and concludes that there's no point in upsetting any of the gods. After all, the goal of the game is to become the next superior god. Revenge will have to wait until the protagonist becomes a god. What he needs now is information. So Yusurina looks around searching for Yi-hyun and tries to charm him. The god is disgusted and says that if she doesn't want to be turned inside out, she should never use that tone again. Innocently, Princess Sungho tries to pretend to be a cute little princess, but Yehan shuts him down immediately and says he already knows, and you shouldn't try to fool him. So Sungho decides he should treat the god like a game moderator. He tries to start a conversation again, this time getting straight to the point. The protagonist asks what the conditions are to leave this world. Man says the condition is to survive until the end, although there are ways to leave in the middle. Then Sunghoon asks if the god can explain how to leave the game midway, and the fighter replies that you need to be noticed by a god. If one of the gods likes a player enough, they can select them before the game ends through a special selection. And our little prince already asks if he can ask to leave. Yan doesn't even care, he says he's not in the mood. Then the protagonist asks why a world like this was created, but the soldier reminds him he's just a staff member. But Yusarina isn't referring to him, she's talking about the gods who created a game instead of just picking someone. For a brief moment, Ihan falls silent, but Sud explains it's because the gods aren't omnipotent. The princess questions him and Yihen reveals that the gods don't know everything and can't do just anything. And it's not the strong who survive, it's the survivors who are strong. So for a human to show what they're capable of, extreme situations are necessary. With talent, without talent, strong, weak. Woman, child, elder, or orc. Throw everyone in together and see who comes out on top. Whoever's left is the most useful. Sunghoon shows he understands, and the god is surprised that he isn't angry. The protagonist asks if he's supposed to be angry. Yemen looks around while considering the question. That admits it's strange to think that way, but the princess boy is extraordinary. Yusarina thanks him for the kind words. But deep down, Sunghoon vows to wipe the smile off the god's face someday. Lastly, the princess wants to know why he showed up in person instead of creating an NPC to be the hero, which is in fact a great question. Then the god reveals that to defeat the Demon King in his current state, it would take 100 third evolution warriors and one in the fourth. And since a fourth evolution warrior is already at a demigod's level, it's impossible to create someone like that. So he came in person. Then the protagonist asks why not just make a weaker Demon King. Man says that's not possible. The world has a balance and a weak monster won't provide the kind of reward players need. But on the other hand, defeating the Demon King as he is now will give all kinds of overpowered loot. Just as Sunghoon is about to ask what he means by that, Choi Chul-hyung steps up to Yihan. The frog puts his finger in the god's face and demands answers. Yihan simply slams the guy to the ground. He passes out immediately for speaking disrespectfully. And it falls to Princess Sunghoon to ask Woon Graham to carry the guy, since they can't just leave him there. At that moment, Mai Renee asks the god how he did that, and Yihan asks what she means. She's referring to the speed of the fighter's counterattack. Mehen says it's because he saw the guy coming and asks if she didn't hear him last time. When he says she exposes herself too much by making unnecessary attacks. To put it simply, the demon's sword's technique is crude. So Mai Renee asks the god if he could teach her, sending Sunghoon into a panic. If she gets stronger, they're doomed. Mehen says he's not interested in making our princess boy cheer internally. But the swordswoman doesn't give up and asks what she has to do to make him want to help. The god looks at his pinky finger while thinking, then proposes to teach the player if she scores more than 100,000 points in that mission. Sunghoon does some mental math to get that many points. She'd have to risk her life and give up high-class rewards, so she shouldn't accept. But Mai Renee does accept, without even thinking twice. Yan decides that it's time to stop chatting and move on. The best outcome for the protagonist would be if Mai Renee collapsed from exhaustion chasing points. Baeku calls the group out for letting the god do everything and missing out on points. The mage adds that Kang Lihan and his clan should take the front lines, but the leader of Hetefa says it's easy for him to say that while casting spells from a distance. While the warriors are putting their necks on the line every second of the battle, his comment annoys some mages nearby, and a completely pointless argument starts. Each one thinks they're doing better than the others. Ignoring the argument, Princess Sunghoon calculates she has 84,000 points. 12,000 came just from killing deserters. And if eliminating players gives a lot of points, then sacrifices will have to be made. So Yusarina walks up to the group and asks the men if they don't want to fight because they're afraid of dying. Because if that's the case, they don't need to worry. Everyone will be able to gain a new life. Realizing she's got everyone's attention, Princess Sunghoon smiles. Then she explains that there's an item capable of reviving fallen soldiers, and it's called the Phoenix Feather. And she'll give that item to all the warriors at the end of the mission. Some random player says there's no way such an item exists. But then another player reminds everyone that the mission description mentions a bonus life as a reward. Of course, it's all made up by our princess boy, and he's willing to see the lie through to the end. Baeku asks the princess if the item can be used on others. Yusarina replies that as long as there's a body, the item can be used. People start putting their minds to work. Everyone has only 2 lives, an item like that would be worth trillions. And the first thought that comes to the poor is to sell it. But it doesn't stop there. Our princess boy says that in addition to the feather, he'll grant each one the treasure they desire. And whoever kills the Demon King will receive his family's heirloom, the runic sword. Then the princess shows everyone the weapon's stats. The runic sword grants 200% mana expansion along with a Hellfire skill. One of the random players decides that with rewards like that, the risk is worth it. And another random one is actually excited to die now. One of Muhan's subordinates tells the leader that they should head to the front line. Kildian also decides he's going to the vanguard. Even without the extra life, the frog really wants to get the runic sword, since the only weakness of his class is consuming too much mana. Myrene also volunteers to join the front line. And as the saying goes, where the cow goes, the ox follows. Muhan decides that he and his clan will go too. One of the subordinates even tries to argue, but the warrior won't take no for an answer. Besides, the true front line will be Yihan, so they should trust their leader and move forward, because they are not cowards. And Dumb and Dumber end up agreeing, excited. Once again, Baekwu is the only one thinking and suggests dividing the group into three. The people who want the reward go to the front. Archers and mages take the middle, and whoever is scared or feels weak stays in the rear. Of course, a monster might show up and attack from behind, but it's still safer than the front lines. So Sun-hoon feels satisfied with the outcome of his little push, but Hansen interrupts his thoughts. The Count and the Knight question the princess about the phoenix feather, and she flat out tells them they don't know the item because it doesn't actually exist. The mage is surprised and asks why Serena lied. Then the protagonist realizes these two NPCs are going to be a problem, because the ease of lying came precisely from everyone thinking the princess was an NPC. But with NPCs, it was the opposite. They definitely already knew the item didn't exist. Our princess boy decides to talk with the NPCs and asks how the players would act if she, the princess, had lied to them. There was no choice but to lie to lift the mood. Count Hansen confesses he doesn't know when the princess became so bitter, but since the world and everything living in it is in danger, he'll turn a blind eye. With one less person to convince, the protagonist asks Woongram what he thinks, but the knight doesn't feel right about the lie. So Yusarina reminds Woongram that she won't live for much longer, since the future of the world depends on the princess's sacrifice. And if her destiny is to die, then whatever it takes to achieve her goal must be done. Then, after a whole emotional blackmail session, the princess boy asks Woon to keep her secret. The knight has been uneasy with the aristocrat ever since she beheaded 2 men for trying to flee. But in the end, he decides to do as she wishes. The princess thanks him with a smile and walks away, leaving the 2 NPCs alone. Hansen places a supportive hand on Woongram's shoulder and tries to comfort the man, saying that in the end, the one who suffers most from the princess's decisions is the princess herself, because she was always a kind soul known as the flower of the empire. If she had to lie, it was because of the situation she was forced into. But deep in her heart, she feels ashamed of herself. The knight listens to his friend without saying a word, and comes to the conclusion that the mage is right. He shouldn't doubt the princess who offered her own life to save the empire. Not far from there, Princess Sun-hoon walks away. The situation is under control for now, but once he starts assassinating people, the NPCs will start suspecting the princess again. So it's best to get rid of the troublesome ones before it reaches that point. The protagonist plans to kill the knight and the mage at the first opportunity. Despite the challenges, the mission was going well, while the rankers inside the castle were facing the least difficulty. The battle outside, fought by the weaker players, was the hardest. Meanwhile, the task of defending the castle, entrusted to the mid-tier players, was progressing fairly easily. Of course, no one involved in the mission knew that. A cloaked warrior informs Ellie that their allies are approaching. The mage focuses her power on a crystal ball in front of her and asks everyone to hold their position, as they need to hold on a little longer. But the warrior loses patience and says they can't afford to wait. A deafening sound hits the structure of the fort. Outside, the enemies attack the walls, creating a growing crack in the stone, while a giant orc tries to break down the gate with the weight of his body. At the command, all the archers fire toward the numerous opponents, creating a rain of arrows that falls upon the monsters, one they couldn't possibly defend against. Inside, Ellie was still focused on the crystal ball, until the magic within it finally reached 100%, and a vibrant light began to radiate from the item. After the arrows, the monsters saw something far worse fall from the sky, a rain of fireballs that completely roasted the enemies outside. The people in the fort got very excited about the spell. They just had to hold out until sunset. While fire rained down outside, inside the mission points rained down on the mage. Ellie faked an accident and got rid of the other mages, monopolizing all the points for herself. But she couldn't stop thinking about Sun-hoon, wondering how the boy was doing in the assault team. The princess's hand glows as she casts lightning magic. Even though it's not her specialty, the protagonist has already adapted to combat as a mage, defeating enemies in a support role. On the front line, the warriors try to stay organized to avoid unnecessary risks, and the members of the Atefa clan stay strong, especially Kang Moon-han, who's having fun clearing the way. Count Hansen comments to the princess that her plan worked. The current situation is far better than before. However, Yusarina rejects the compliment and asks how the knight Woongram is doing. The mage replies that the man is still sad, but seems to have recovered a little. Sun-hoon is bothered by the knight's stubbornness, The Count's presence is necessary to keep the princess in combat, but Woongram is no longer useful. In fact, now he's more of a burden than help. So our princess boy decides that the Knight Woongram will need to be eliminated, but he still doesn't know exactly how he'll make that happen. Poisoning would only work with a single-tier potion. Even with sword skills enhanced by the runic blade, it still wouldn't be enough. And traps wouldn't work on the Knight either. That damn NPC is too overpowered. No matter how the protagonist uses the princess's abilities, there's no easy way to get rid of him. It gives the princess boy a major headache. Hansen is concerned about the young lady's state, and still insists that the princess should stay further back. The mage's words give Sung-hoon an idea, and the young princess smiles like the Demon King's secretary himself. Count Hansen congratulates the players on clearing another wing, and asks everyone to gather because he has something to say. The mage raises a suspicious-looking mist, and from it emerges the ancient map of the dungeon's structure. The Count's old finger points to where the players are. Baekwu, acting as general spokesperson, says the group has already completed 2/3 of the dungeon and asks if that's not a good thing. With a dark look, Hansen says that in terms of distance, they really have made great progress, and they will be able to reach the heart of the labyrinth where the Demon King is. However, before that, they need to deal with a serious problem. Then the mage points to another area on the map. Joking around, Muven asks why that area is so big if there happens to have a dragon, and laughs. But the old man's silence says it all, and little by little the warrior stops laughing, until Muven finally asks the mage if there really is a dragon there. The players fall silent, terrified by the possibility. Then the Count says it's not exactly a dragon, more like a third cousin of a dragon, and this lovely creature's name is the Ancient Hydra. The crowd just repeats the creature's name to make sure they heard it right. Some random player asks if that's not a mythological creature, and the mage says that although it's not as strong as the one from the myths, it's far more powerful than a regular Hydra. The Ancient Hydra has 4 necks. The randoms think 4 is a small number, but Hansen asks them not to underestimate the monster, because according to legend, with its 4 necks, the Hydra can freely use the powers of fire, ice, wind, and poison. Then Muven tells the old man he doesn't understand why he's so worried. Magical creatures that use 4 elements aren't that rare, and the mage says that even so, the Hydra is enormous. But Yian interrupts, saying the creature's just big. No need to worry that much. The Count considers that with the soldier present, it really might not be so hard, and it's better not to scare everyone. Once they arrive, the group spots the creature, all necks, and menace. To make things worse, the abomination walks on 4 legs. When the mage said the creature was big, he wasn't lying. The Hydra is the size of a corporate building. Aurora erupts from all 4 of the monster's heads, applying a fear effect to the players and reducing their stats by 20%. Yian tries to calm the others while casting a magic circle, but when he looks back, he sees the others still frozen in place. The warriors are paralyzed by the size of the Hydra. Doesn't even seem realistic to fight the creature. Yian walks past the frightened players and tells them to try not to die from collateral damage. The god concentrates energy in his hand, creating a pink aura, and fires an energy cannon from his fist. It shoots straight toward the center of the colossal monster and hits directly, causing an explosion. The Hydra lets out a piercing scream, but Yian doesn't wait. He casts another skill that leaps toward the monster. The soldier easily reaches the top with a single jump, landing several blows on the 4 necks. Still in the group, Mai Renee is surprised at how Yihan makes a basic skill look like divine art. Still midair, the soldier manages to redirect all the Hydra's attacks, and the creature begins to enter a berserk state. If the players don't move, they'll be crushed. Out of nowhere, Kang Muhan flies toward the monster, throwing his spear at one of the necks. The blade hits the Hydra scales and bounces off. Even so, the warrior prepares and conjures another spear, jumping again toward the Hydra, this time using an active skill before throwing. And again, the blade hits and bounces off. Not even a powerful attack from the warrior does anything to the creature. Then the Hydra whips its neck at Muhan, sending him crashing to the ground like a meteor. Even after seeing that, Mai Renee charges into the battle. Because there's no other way, if she wants to get stronger, she must fight the Hydra. The swordswoman plans to apply the same strategy as Yihan, redirect, not block, or overpower. She reaches the top by jumping across the creature, then prepares to strike with her sword. The attack makes the monster twist, and the demon's sword goes flying, and Mai Renee ends up with a dislocated shoulder. On the other hand, now the Hydra looks like a tangled pair of earbuds fresh out of a pocket. Megan finds it monstrous that the swordswoman managed to reinterpret his technique using her own skill. Count Hansen takes advantage of the opening to cast immobilization magic, and asks all the other mages to do the same. Then the group uses various types of magic to restrain the Hydra, trapping the creature between 4 magic circles. Yin commands everyone to attack at once, but the crowd doesn't seem very eager to charge at the Hydra. Poor Muven had to get up off the ground to ask the others if they're scared, which surprises everyone. It thought he was done for. Now with Kang Muhan's encouragement, the warriors advance. The Hydra's fire element head prepares a flaming attack, and a pillar of plasma shoots toward the nearest group of players. But Soldier Yihan redirects the fire's path with his fist, Then the god warns the warriors to be careful of short-range attacks and says he'll do his best to deal with the spellcasters. Thus, the Hydra's chamber becomes a battlefield. From far away, very far, our princess boy notices everyone is distracted by the fight. While the others were fighting, he was looking for traps in the area that hadn't been triggered yet. The protagonist holds his breath while pressing a brick into the wall and lets out his best damsel in distress scream. The players look around startled, then realize the princess is missing. The players panic when they realize Yahello has been kidnapped, not knowing that she kidnapped herself. Woongram, who had been near the noblewoman the entire time, is confused. Still mid-combat, Count Hansen shouts for the knight to go after the princess. So Woon leaves the battlefield in a rush. Just a few steps ahead, the knight steps on a trap. A giant bear trap from the ceiling begins to snap shut, but the knight manages to dodge it. While doing a spin in the air, Woongram wonders why there are so many traps still active if they had already cleared them. There's everything: spiked floors, wrecking balls, arrows, but the guy is lighting fast. The sound of multiple traps being triggered announces that the knight is approaching like a bolt of lightning. If Sung-hoon hadn't activated all the traps along the path, he would have already been caught. But luckily, the protagonist has already arrived where he wanted, and now our princess boy begins his work. First, he pulls a little dagger from his inventory and coats the entire blade with poison. At the very least, he'll need to make a small cut on Woongram. Then there's only one thing left to do. The princess closes her eyes and takes a deep breath, then drinks the same poison used to coat the blade. The glass vial falls from her hands and spills across the floor, and the high-level potion begins to deteriorate Yahello's health. This has got to be the worst way to find out if your poison works, huh? But even a potion that's strong wouldn't work on Woongram, so Sung-hoon is willing to use even his own life as a strategic advantage. While the princess boy rides on the ground, the knight comes running. As he gets close to the young woman, Woongram asks if she's alright. But Serena vomits red onto the floor. Then the weirdo dips a finger in the vomit and gives it a taste to find out what it is, discovering it's poison, which is very strange. He's never seen a monster in this dungeon use methods like that. But there's no time to wonder how the princess got poisoned, since she's dying on the floor. Woongram picks Serena up in his arms and runs to find a mage. The man blames himself for her condition. He shouldn't have let the lies get to him, because in the end, it's a knight's duty to protect the princess no matter what. Meanwhile, Sung-hoon waits for the perfect moment. It needs to be before Woongram activates his aura shield, close enough that he can't dodge, in a situation where he wouldn't even consider the possibility, and during a moment of distraction. Right now, all those conditions are true. The protagonist slides the blade through the gap in the knight's armor, activating the passive skill Silver Blade Strike, a technique with a high chance of ignoring enemy defenses, though it also heavily depends on luck. The knight falls to his knees and tries to make sense of the princess's actions. Sung-hoon wastes no time and opens his inventory window, quickly taking an antidote for the poison, tossing the vial aside immediately afterward. At last, our princess boy feels okay again. The plan was a success, and now the protagonist can breathe. Meanwhile, Woongram begins to suspect that the princess might have been affected by some kind of dark magic, because she would never try to kill him. But regardless of what the knight thinks, Sung-hoon approaches him. The man tries to muster the strength to retaliate, but the skill effect and the poison on the blade are too much. Finally, the protagonist brings the sword to the knight's neck and begins to separate his head from the body. For a moment, it seems like he was trying to say something. Not that it matters. What matters is that now there's one less obstacle. The princess's dress ends up completely filthy. Can't wait to see how he plans to clean that. And it was totally worth it. The sword's level went up by 70,000 points. Now all that's left is cleaning up the mess. Sung-hoon places Woongram's body in the mouth of a defeated monster. That way, no one will be able to determine the cause of death. But the dress is impossible to clean, so he'll have to dirty it even more with the same thing. Members of the attack team approach the area. Maybe the Hydra battle is over. Our princess boy points the dagger at his own side and plunges the blade into the right side of his chest. It was an almost perfect plan. Almost. Too bad the protagonist forgot the dagger was still poisoned. In the end, Sung-hoon made a mistake. Well, nobody's perfect, right? Count Hansen and two random players find the princess lying on the ground, and the mage hurries the priest player to heal her. And beside the princess, the old man notices another body. None other than his friend Woongram. How could the greatest knight of the entire Imperial Guard end up like this, crushed in the jaws of some random monster? That's all that goes through Count Hansen's mind. Something feels wrong. The body is mangled, but the ground around it is clean, and the wounds seem to have been made by a sharp blade. Perhaps the knight was defeated by someone stronger than him. But that wouldn't explain the state the body is in. Even Hansen, the wise one, could not uncover the truth behind Shin Woongram's murder, because the mage would never suspect that the culprit is Princess Serena. After the battle against the Hydra and the princess's rescue, the player group set up camp. Princess Sung-hoon wakes up startled inside a tent. Beside her is the Count, who informs her that her wounds were healed and the poison removed from her body. On the outside, our princess boy gives thanks, but on the inside, he's afraid he might have left behind some evidence because of the mistake he made at the end. The mage interrupts the protagonist's thoughts to inform him that Woongram has passed on to the next world, which makes an Oscar-worthy performance necessary. The princess boy starts crying as if he just lost money in the street, and pretends not to believe something like this could really happen. Hansen even gets emotional and cries along. Sung-hoon found it extremely easy to fake the sorrow. He knows it's thanks to the princess's social skills, which allow for complex performances. From outside the tent, you can hear the girl sobbing. One of the randoms outside comments that it's been an hour since the princess started crying and adds that if this continues, she'll probably fall ill. And it must have been the goal to cry for a full hour, because the protagonist gets up and walks out of the tent. Sung-hoon apologizes for making a scene to the randos who were commenting on the crying. And when they're caught, they change the subject and say it's only natural she's suffering the loss of a precious subordinate. Yi-yeon watches the scene from a distance. If it were a player crying, no one would wait around so patiently. The only reason people show the princess any respect is because she's an important NPC needed to complete the dungeon. But the noblewoman tells those nearby that she can't stay sad forever, and they need to move forward. Maven says that even if the princess were totally fine, they wouldn't be able to move yet, since ever since they finished the Hydra mission, no one's been able to agree on how to split the rewards. And really, when the protagonist stops to think about it, the rewards from a monster that massive must be just as impressive. So the princess asks the hero what kind of item appeared to cause so much conflict, since these people don't get impressed by just any magical gear. He even tosses the loot bag at the noblewoman and tells her to check it herself. And Yusarina catches the bag midair. When the protagonist looks at the rewards, he understands the issue. The first item is the Venom Dragon's magic spear, that tricky beast, and the Venom Dragon's armor, both legendary items. Sung-hoon thinks for a moment after analyzing the items. Naturally, the group would fight over items like these. So the princess asks Yi-han if it wouldn't be better to give the items to whoever can make the best use of them, and he agrees. According to the hero, the spear should go to Kang Myu-han, and the armor to Mei Rine, since the two of them contributed the most in the battle. But Yi-yeon steps in, saying that won't be possible. The princess boy takes the opportunity to ask who the individual is. He introduces himself as Kim Yi-yeon, just an ordinary priest. The protagonist makes a mental note to be cautious with this guy and asks why the rewards can't be distributed that way. Then the player says the truth is simple. As much as they're together for this mission, once it ends, they go back to being competitors, and it's only natural to want to stop the competition from getting stronger. Sung-hoon is surprised the guy actually had the guts to say it. If players can't have something, they'd rather no one else does either. At that moment, the protagonist realizes the priest is a villain too. So our princess boy slips back into character and says it's ridiculous to get hung up on this kind of thing. Because when the mission is over, the princess will open the Imperial Vault and everyone will be able to take whatever items they want, including jewels and gold. But Yi-yeon's not buying it. He even doubts the vault exists. Yusarina warns the player to be careful with what he says and asks how he dares to mock the Empire. But the priest just keeps doubting and even admits he never believed any of her promises from the beginning. The princess asks Yi-yeon what he means by that. Then the player brings up the item promised before the Hydra battle, the Phoenix Feather, and asks why the princess wouldn't have brought such a valuable item into the dungeon. If she had it, she could revive Woongram. Finally, the priest questions whether such an item even exists in the Empire, which triggers the princess's blade in response. Sergin holds the sword at the priest's neck, and in that moment, it's impossible to tell whether the protagonist is acting or not. Kim Yi-yeon feels pleased to have made the noblewoman angry, which only increases his suspicion that the princess might not be an NPC after all. The princess boy tells the priest he likely doesn't understand the meaning behind his words. The player tries to push back, but the blade gets even closer to his neck, causing a small cut. He won't be forgiven if he mocks the Empire again. Then the priest confidently says that it won't end well for her if she eliminates him in public like that. And our little prince asks what consequences he's talking about. The truth is, no one really cares if an NPC eliminates him or not. Especially since, as the priest himself said earlier, people only act out of self-interest. And in the end, since they're all competitors and Yi-yeon's defeat would benefit them in the reward split, the protagonist decides to take a risk and asks the Count to confirm his story. Fortunately, the mage confirms that the Phoenix Feather does indeed exist. It seems our little villain managed to convince even the NPC to lie for him. Hansen goes even further and says the reason they didn't bring the item to the mission is that monsters have taken over the Imperial Vault. The princess says the current situation is shameful, as everyone is about to face the Demon King. If things continue like this, more and more people will be sacrificed in vain, so from now on, Serena will decide what to do with the rewards. Kang Myu-han isn't happy with the decision and gets ready to protest, but the aristocrat says something interesting. As previously stated, the spear will go to the leader of Hetafa. I bet now the guy has no problem with her deciding. And the armor goes to Mei Rine, who hadn't shown any interest, but obviously accepts. The princess says the remaining items will be fairly distributed among the rest, and the clueless players express their thanks. Defeated, Yi-yeon decides to remain silent in the face of the situation, and our little prince is satisfied to show the priest who's in charge. With that resolved, the only item left is the Hydra Poison, and a late-level item. In the dead of night, someone enters one of the camp tents. Koi Cheolgyeon has been secretly summoned by the princess. Serena gets straight to the point. She will hand over the runic blade to the player. The toad accepts on his knees and says it will be an honor. But before he can celebrate, the princess explains that the sword is still sealed and a sacrifice will be necessary. Cheolgyeon gets nervous, but the supposed NPC tells the player there's no need to be tense, because the sacrifice won't be the toad, it will be Count Hansen. Once they are in the presence of the Demon King, the player must eliminate the mage painlessly and then return the sword. Cheolgyeon asks if he couldn't just finish the battle with the item. Then the princess explains that to defeat the Demon King, the Hellfire skill is needed, which only the aristocrat can currently use. So Sunhoon makes up a story that the soldier faces the Demon King head-on. The knight is supposed to protect the princess and the mage is to be sacrificed, so that the princess can land the final blow on the boss. And poor Choi Cheolgyeon believes that, after all, it makes sense that all NPCs would have roles in the story, leaving the protagonist once again satisfied with the results of his manipulation. Then the player leaves the tent with the runic blade in his possession. God Yihan watches the scene but does not interfere. Finally, the group is ready to face the Demon King. Behind the massive iron doors stands the final boss of the mission. Kang Myuhan lifts the group's spirits and announces that when the soldier reaches the Demon King, Hetefo will be on the front line. One of his subordinates almost protests, but the leader simply looks at the guy and asks if he really expected the clan to run for safety. After all, even though most act for self-interest, there are still those who make decisions based on their emotions, and Myuhan is one of those people. Unlike Sunhoon, who was born with zero altruism. The only ones who knew the princess was supposed to die in the original story were Woon Graham, who's already gone, and Count Hansen, who's about to go. Our dirty little prince offers the Hydra Poison to the mage as if it were a vitality potion, and at first the NPC refuses. But the princess insists and says the item is useless to her. So the Count emotionally accepts the gift given out of kindness, and drinks the entire vial without the slightest suspicion. Sunghoon casts a look among the players, and Choi Cheolgyeon quickly understands what it means. Yen stops in front of the final gate and offers a word of advice to everyone before the battle. The players should not even get close to the Demon King, especially those who are not top rankers. After all, everyone there is just a supporting character. And finally, looking at the princess, the soldier advises them not to be too greedy. Our little prince knows that's directed at him, but doesn't understand what the hero means. Finally, the metallic gates open and a blinding red light bursts from within. Behind the skeleton army and seated on the throne, a horned humanoid creature with slate-colored skin makes its appearance. But before the Demon King can finish his speech, Yihan has already attacked, and the monster looks all sad because he couldn't finish introducing himself. The soldier loses his patience and says he was dragged there by force and isn't having fun like the Demon King. From the conversation, someone realizes that the mission boss is another god, and he finds that rather discouraging. Then the demon draws everyone's attention with a fake cough, and resumes his act, threatening all the players in a stereotypical villain speech. The final battle finally begins. Count Hansen is feeling terrible and can barely stand without any apparent reason. As planned, Cheolgyeon is already positioned behind the mage, and the player finishes the job quickly, following the princess's instructions. Even in the middle of battle, players notice the mage's hat falling, and they ask if Choi Cheolgyeon has lost his mind or is under some kind of spell. But the toad says everything he did is according to the story, leaving everyone even more confused. Cheolgyeon dodges the questions and says it's not the time to talk. He'll explain later. And he's right, because half a dozen little skeletons are already charging at them. So the players forget what happened and refocus on the battle. At the back of the Demon King's chamber, Choi Cheolgyeon informs the princess that he did what she asked and returns the sword. Since Hansen drank the poison without questioning it, everything went smoothly, and the seal on the runic blade is now broken. A shadow flashes past the princess at high speed. The battle between Yihan and the Demon King is far too fast to follow with the naked eye. You can catch glimpses of the impacts from various strikes, but it's incredibly hard to tell what's actually going on. So our little prince has no idea how he'll find an opening to strike. Myuhan is thrilled with his new spear and draws the demon's attention without any hesitation. While the enemy defends against the spear strike, the demon blade closes in from behind, landing squarely on the back of the Demon King's neck. The guy pretending to be the Demon King didn't think it would be that hard to face Yihan. He didn't expect mere humans to become this strong in just a few months. His plans to teach a lesson to God Yihan also fell apart, since the hero turned out to be far stronger than imagined. And as if that wasn't enough, the Demon King also had to make sure he was hit on purpose by the Hellfire. A little before the mission, inside the castle floating in the void, the butler god warned the lesser god that the Demon King's body was far too strong for the players. So no matter what happens, he must be hit by the Hellfire blast. The young deity tries to argue whether it's really necessary, but the old man doesn't care. This mission is meant to teach the players important lessons, and if he disobeys, he'll be caged and punished. With all that said, the battle has been going on for a while and still no sign of the Hellfire. So the Demon King gets tired and decides he's done playing nice. the monster touches the ground and conjures a spirit storm, spreading red aura souls across the battlefield. Now it really seems the demon has snapped, laughing maniacally. But Yian isn't surprised by a fellow god taking advantage of the situation. The soldier fully intends to find him after the mission ends. Meanwhile, Sunghun is still searching for an opening, while people around him are running in panic from the souls. If things keep going this way, everyone will die to the Demon King. So our little prince orders all the priests and clerics to start praying. It should work since the enemy is a demon. Thanks to divine power, the wounded warriors on the battlefield begin to recover, and the Demon King becomes slower. Taking advantage of the moment, the vanguard charges the enemy, channeling every kind of attack at the monster from all directions. Finally, the protagonist finds the opening he needs. Sunghun holds the runic blade for a moment, and completes the mission of striking the Demon King with the Hellfire. The poor god pretending to be the Demon King gets beaten desperately while trying to position himself to be hit. But Yian shows no mercy and also prepares a finishing blow. The beast takes a punch and bends backward, and now he's also getting hit by spells. So on top of getting beaten, he's also set on fire. At least he finally got hit by the ability. Mission accomplished for him. The Demon King turns to dust, poor thing, marking the end of the battle. In the end, Yian even felt a little sorry for him. He was too focused on trying to get hit by the Hellfire. People can't believe it's over, and some even think it was easy. Of course, they didn't do anything. One battered guy notices something odd and points it out. Turns out the battle against the Demon King dropped an absurd amount of gold and a few rare items. Everyone gets distracted and rushes toward the loot. Muin tries to calm the group down, but someone yells not to get too close, and Sukuna, pouting, only sees the arrow whiz past him. The arrow lodges itself in the wall, leaving everyone confused. Then a guy casts a binding spell and a bunch of chains shoot out of him. The items float up into the air, and that's when everyone gets even more confused. The chain guy is surprised by what he sees. Just like all the other players, apparently there was something underneath the rewards. The most valuable drop from the Demon King was his essence, an item that allows a player to change classes and become the Demon King himself. Sunghun thinks about how that one reward alone is worth more than all the others from the mission. The rascal even considers grabbing it and running now that the auction to return home is active. However, it seems Yihan's warning about greed really stuck in his head, or rather, in the princess's head. A colossal fight over the loot is about to break out. Koichiolgim is glad he doesn't have to join the brawl, since at least he got the runic blade. But when he looks to the side, the princess is nowhere to be found. She's vanished without a trace. Then the scene cuts to a dusty corner of the dungeon that clearly hasn't seen a broom in ages. The protagonist is already far away. If he tried to pull anything now with his current strength, he'd only lose. And since he already has the runic blade plus the rewards the princess had been holding, it's best to slip away with only gains. Sunghun grabs his stuff and teleports back. Back in his own body, the young man appears in an extremely bright place, with someone clapping for him. Instead of returning to the city, the protagonist ends up in Jerry's little dimension, where the helper gives him a big congratulations. And our boy admits he didn't think he'd make it this time. Then the assistant says it's good to see him again and offers him a short break. Since in Jerry's world everything is free and infinite, Sunghun decides he deserves some pampering after suffering like a princess. So he gets a full-on brunch. Coffee, cake, brownies, fruit, the works. The helper asks if the food was good, and the young man says he feels truly rewarded after everything he went through. Then, just to tease the stingy villain, Jerry asks if he doesn't want any of the rewards. Sunghun just shakes his head. No way, imagine going back empty-handed. Then the deity snaps his fingers and changes the setting to what looks like a law office. But before any business, the protagonist has a question. Since instead of being reborn as himself inside an NPC's body, he ended up in the body of a princess from the story and had to use some questionable methods. He wants to know if there's any way people will find out how he completed the mission. But Jerry assures him they keep each player's info secret. Besides, since there's a certain god watching the protagonist, they need to do everything they can to make sure no one finds out. Sunghun plays dumb and asks what he means by a god being interested in him. But the assistant isn't fooled and says it's a secret. The young man then remembers the gift he got before the mission. It clearly said it was from Loki, encouraging him. But whatever, all that matters is that no one will find out he was the little princess. Jerry informs the protagonist that he racked up nearly 120,000 points. Sunghun is shocked. He thought he only had around 80-something thousand and asks where the other 30 came from. The assistant explains it was from the amount of hellfire he used during the Demon King fight. Since the young man was just spamming the skill every chance he got, he had no idea it added up to that much. So our mercenary boy is thrilled with the unexpected earnings. Without further delay, Jerry pulls out a never-ending list of every reward seen during the mission. And Sunghun is surprised that, as the little princess, he was only wearing high-end fashion. Time to start shopping. First, of course, he picks the runic blade. Otherwise, all his suffering would have been for nothing. Only 30,000 points are left, and all the worthwhile items are way too expensive. However, our young man finds a few bargains hidden in the list. High-level ballet for 3,000, salsa for 2,000, tap dance for just 1,000. Sung-hoon asks if skills weren't supposed to be expensive. Jerry explains that powerful abilities are expensive, but little dance, obviously cheap. Sung-hoon's eyes practically sparkle at the chance to become an idol. So the protagonist buys every possible dance skill, and Jerry is now fully convinced he's lost his mind. The helper starts theorizing in his head, wondering if the boy is trying to attract the attention of the god of entertainment or something like that. He stares at him suspiciously but ends up concluding there must be a reason. After all, Sung-hoon isn't stupid. With the 2,000 points left, he buys the Hydra Poison and the Guardian Ring. Jerry claps his hands and says he'll still have about 1,000 points left over. Then all the purchases are transferred to the protagonist's inventory. Jerry says, unfortunately, their meeting has come to an end and Sung-hoon acts all needy, asking if Jerry doesn't have time for him. The deity tells the boy not to get too attached, but not to worry, they'll meet again soon. Sung-hoon asks what he means by that, and the long-haired lord opens his eyes and pulls a terrifying face while asking if the boy really thought that would be the last forced mission. As a warning for certain people and to give them a chance to grow, compulsory missions will continue to happen. Then Jerry says that doesn't mean they'll be the only targets. But right after, the helper realizes he said too much and let something slip that he shouldn't have. Suddenly, he yanks open the curtains of reality with all his strength, leaving the protagonist in panic, wondering where that red curtain came from and what Jerry's about to do with it. Thankfully, the helper just sends the protagonist back to his world, just in time to receive a visitor whose eyes shine even in the dark. Loki steps forward into the light, showing off his rich kid outfit. Jerry pretends nothing's wrong and greets the god, and Loki says the situation is concerning. The helper, now scared stiff, asks what the god is thinking. Then Loki drops it straight. It's about what to do with Jerry for mentioning a secret to a player, and wonders aloud if it wouldn't be better to just get rid of the helper. The assistant lowers his head in shame, but in the end, Loki just sighs. He'll let it slide this time because he doesn't think it was intentional, and because Jerry shut up as soon as he realized his mistake. The long-haired guy bows awkwardly to thank the god boy. Secretly, Loki actually cares, because very soon all the players will find out what the helper was talking about. Back in the game world, it's another beautiful day. Players are slowly being teleported back. Sung-hoon is disappointed he couldn't rest a little longer in Jerry's world. Then a system window pops up informing him that the points he didn't spend after the mission were multiplied by 10 and converted into money. The first thing the protagonist does upon returning is visit the weapon shop. Apparently, our young man has a special request for the blacksmith, who doesn't mind at all. He was bored with the lack of business anyway. Our villain wants to know if it's possible to change your weapon's shape. The blacksmith, Lulu, crosses his arms and says it's not impossible. Then the protagonist places the rapier on the counter and asks how much it would cost to turn it into a longsword. The blacksmith's first reaction is shock. He asks the boy how he even got a sword like that. But without waiting for an answer, he says it costs 5 million, but if the boy brings multicolored steel and a mythic stone, he'll lower it to 500. The protagonist is outraged and wants to know why it's so expensive. Lulu explains that to enlarge a rapier like that, you need materials, and that costs a lot. So some of them starts doing some quick math. The mythic stone only exists in the hardest C-rank mission, and he's never even heard of the multicolored steel. Since modifying it would be too expensive, the boy changes his mind and asks for a new sword instead. The blacksmith asks what shape he wants. The protagonist shows him the runic blade and says he wants one exactly like it. Lulu says sure, it'll only take a second. It actually took a full minute, but hey, living in a world where service times are like video games. Not bad at all. So Sung-hoon decides he'll keep the runic blade in his inventory and carry the knockoff blade while he's in the city. That way he can show its stats as a normal sword and won't raise suspicion when using the weapon in combat. More players begin teleporting back to the city, and as they return, some celebrate being alive by shouting in the church street. Others are arguing with the poor girl at the booth for not yet receiving the phoenix feather the princess had promised. Sarah washes her hands of it and reveals that Princess Serena wasn't actually an NPC, and that's all she's allowed to say. The suckers start freaking out once they realize they've been duped. Meanwhile, the person getting all their attention is busy fighting a monster using the sword she snatched from the rest. The gigantic beast charges at the protagonist. Sung-hoon dodges the monster's punch as it slams into the ground. Giant monsters aside, our boy is more focused on finding the rhythm of the fight so he can dance along to it. Sung-hoon blocks the creature's massive paw with his sword, then uses the force of the impact to leap over the beast, slicing through it from top to bottom, leaving a trail of precise cuts. In the end, he basically taught the beast itself how to dance. The protagonist is very satisfied with the results of the mission. Before, he could barely win with traps and potions, but now he's soloing C-rank missions. The dance skills will be incredibly useful. Even though Sung-hoon has decent stats, he can't compete with naturally gifted players. Time to switch the unique blade for the knockoff before heading back to the city. Meanwhile, a crowd starts forming out of nowhere. A nice, orderly line. Someone who's always bandaged asks a bald guy what's wrong with Chul-hyun, and the guy says it looks like he got scanned by someone named Serena. Up front, the madman slams the table and shouts for all to hear that he won't let this go and will pay 10 million to anyone who brings the sword back. Meanwhile, Sung-hoon just stands there with a blank expression waiting in line. When it's his turn, the protagonist hands over the knockoff blade and Choi Chil-hyum hits his hopes up. But the rapier is just a normal sword, while the runic blade is legendary. Not to mention, Serena was a silver-haired white woman, not your average Korean guy. The fool doesn't put two and two together and falls for the trick, letting Sung-hoon go. Scene switches to an elegant tavern. Inside, Ellie waves happily when she sees the protagonist. The guy sits down and complains. He's been trying to reach the mage, but she hasn't shown any sign of life. But the woman doesn't even try to explain herself and changes the subject, asking if the protagonist wants to try a mission no one's completed yet. The young man thinks it over. If no one's completed it, it must be pretty tough. Sung-hoon asks if it's a C-rank mission, and Ellie confirms. It's the Mad Mage's tomb. Then the boy reflects on the quest while the waiter brings another chocolate milk. The problem with that dungeon is the absurd number of enemies. No one can get through. So the protagonist tells his ally it's not happening, and she's shocked. The mage says she heard the Hetafa clan is planning to head there, so they need to move fast and get ahead of them. Then Sung-hoon asks Ellie if she's planning to form a group the size of a soccer stadium crowd. She doesn't answer. Instead, she pulls her chair closer and cozies up to him. Whoa. Then Ellie reveals she found a way to eliminate an entire army of monsters, and gives a mysterious little smile. The idea that such a huge monster group could be wiped out in one go sounded ridiculous. But there's no real reason for Ellie to be lying. Then she asks if the boy will accept her invitation. Sung-hoon says that since she's this confident, there's no reason to turn it down. They just need a map with the shortest route and it'll be easy. Then Ellie asks if he has anyone to call. It's not that the protagonist has no friends. It's just that he can't think of anyone reliable and skilled, since he's only close to Youngie, Mai Renee, and Ellie. After concluding the sad truth that he really doesn't have any other friends, Sung-hoon tells Ellie he's got no one to bring. The mage says she knows someone to invite and thinks the three of them will be enough, and the boy takes the chance to ask how she plans to kill the monster horde. But the woman insists that for now it's a secret and says she'll meet him tomorrow at the southern gate. After Ellie leaves, Sung-hoon stays where he is, considering the possibility that this might be a trap. Back at the weapon shop, the protagonist pulls a random sword from the wall and holds it up to head height as if he's analyzing the blade. Out of nowhere, he starts dancing with the sword around the shop, swinging the blade this way and that. People nearby watch the young man's performance in awe, even among top rankers. No one's ever seen someone who can handle so many weapons. Now that he's dancing better, Sung-hoon's left-hand coordination allows him to choose his second weapon. But the protagonist doesn't want another sword, otherwise it'll seem like he's copying Mai Renee. Maybe he should buy a shield instead. Someone walks up and tells Sung-hoon that if he can also use shields, he's really something. He replies that actually he learns as he goes. Then he realizes he's talking to the demon sword herself, as if she had been summoned by mere thought. Our villain gets worried. Mai Renee was the only one who got a close look at him while he was the princess, and it'd be a problem if she recognized him. But she's way too slow for that and just asks the boy if he's reached a level where he can pick up any weapon and instantly master it. Sung-hoon doesn't quite understand what she's talking about, but he's relieved not to have been recognized. Then she continues with her nonsense. In her mind, the protagonist is basically the god of war. Once again, the protagonist tries to explain that she's misunderstanding. But Mai Renee is too deep in her delusion and says there's no point in trying to hide his skills. He frantically repeats that it's all a misunderstanding. Then the girl winks and asks sarcastically if he's saying everything was just a mistake. At that point, Sung-hoon realizes it's useless to explain. She's never going to get it. Out of nowhere, Renee changes the subject and tells the protagonist she wants to work with him, once again catching him off guard. The scene draws a lot of attention because by now everyone knows the demon sword Mai Renee, so the guy suggests they talk somewhere else. We switch to a more deserted setting. The players sit side by side, and the swordswoman reveals to the protagonist that she wants to form a party with him. Sung-hoon makes it clear right away that even if they become allies, he won't fight against her, hitting right at Mai Renee's true objective. But she still tries to deny it, saying that's not the reason she wants to work with him. She explains that really the problem is that missions are getting harder faster than she's getting stronger. In her slightly unhinged mind, Sung-hoon is the perfect candidate because he's skilled, humble, and on top of that, cute. In the protagonist's warped perspective, he's convinced this is all just some kind of test. But thinking it over, as annoying as Mai Renee can be sometimes, she's the complete package: skill, personality, and honesty. So the boy says that if they form a party, he'll be the leader and manage item distribution, and during missions she'll follow his orders. Then he asks if she understands, and Renee says she clearly does and will follow his orders to the letter. With one condition: Sung-hoon must duel her once a week. He lowers it to once a month and says he'll choose the time and place. She's a bit sad but agrees. And just like that, they make the deal and Mai Renee joins the main party chat. Since their duels will be monthly, she'll have to give it her all to show off everything she's got. and the protagonist internally celebrates having acquired yet another stolen item, the demon sword herself. The next day, by the southern gate, Ellie looks confused because she remembers Sunhoon saying he didn't have anyone to bring. Our boy dodges the topic and says some things happened, plus she had already said it was fine to bring someone else. The mage admits he's not wrong but glances at Mai Renee and stops mid-sentence, and the swordswoman just stares at Ellie blankly. The blonde was expecting the guy to bring a random player, but instead he brought the actual demon sword. Really goes to show you can't judge a book by its cover. Passing the baton, Ellie introduces the other two to a kid named Sejongwon, someone she met during the game. The boy starts to introduce himself with his weak little voice, but out of nowhere, he says he's an assassin. Sunhoon is a bit shocked by the fact that the boy chose that class, considering the kid looks like he's at most 14. The mage decides to introduce herself again to Mai Renee as Ellie the mage, and the swordswoman says it's nice to meet them and also introduces herself, stating her name and class. The protagonist introduces himself to the boy and says he'll speak casually with everyone since, apparently, he's the oldest. No one has any objections to that. Then Sunhoon rolls out a map on the ground, one he bought from the Hetefa clan for 100 coins. He points out the route with the fewest monsters. It might not be the shortest, but it's the safest. But Ellie has other plans and prefers a different path. The protagonist warns her that it's full of monsters. The mage reminds him that she already mentioned she found a way to get rid of the monsters, and once the mission starts, he'll understand. This woman is acting very suspicious. In the end, Sunhoon agrees and secretly hopes Ellie won't betray him, because he really doesn't want to have to assassinate someone he trusts. Meanwhile, the mage is watching him in the most suspicious way possible. Ellie's intention isn't to betray the protagonist, just to be prepared for the worst. She needs to prove that no matter who crosses her, they'll regret it deeply. Then the party teleports to the Mad Mage's dungeon. The first thing Sunhoon does is tell everyone to be careful. Mai Renee is on the protagonist's right, with both swords drawn and ready. On the left, the mage and the assassin seem equally prepared. But there's some tension in the air between Sunhoon, who suspects this dungeon might be a trap, and Ellie, who wants to show the protagonist what she's capable of and make him think twice before trying to cast her aside. The group looks around but doesn't see any monsters just yet. That's when Sunhoon decides to address the elephant in the room and ask the mage what plane she's hiding, because he wants to know. But the mage says she can't reveal it just yet, not while they're standing there. She has to plant her solution. The protagonist is confused, plant. And Ellie explains it has to do with the reward she got from the last mission. To help him understand, she opens her inventory and selects the Demon Trail Cannon, and the woman just whips out a sniper rifle. Sunhoon notes that it looks like a gun, and guns usually fire in only one direction. Ellie replies that it's possible to spread the energy depending on how the user handles it. The worrying part is that the first monster wave has 80 zombies, so the protagonist asks how long it takes for the cannon to fire, and the mage says around 5 minutes. With that, the protagonist says the 3 melee fighters will draw the monster's attention, while Ellie figures out how powerful the weapon really is. But Sejongwon protests, asking if he can stay behind, because he must protect the mage at all costs. Sunhoon assures him that part of the dungeon is safe, but the boy doesn't want to take the risk, and Ellie tells Jongwon to obey the party leader. So the boy agrees, head lowered. The protagonist finds their dynamic strange. The passive kid protested against him but obeyed the mage instantly. Then Sunhoon says he thought it over and realizes not everyone has to move forward. The boy can stay. The mage apologizes for Sejongwon's dependence, but our guy says it's fine. So the boy stays with Ellie while the other two charge toward the dungeon center. Now alone, Jongwon won't stop apologizing. The mage asks, in a chilling tone, what exactly he feels guilty for. But the boy keeps repeating, I'm sorry, over and over. Then Ellie stares coldly at young Jongwon. The truth is, the mage went out into the streets and picked up some beggars. She exploited their fragile mental state and manipulated them into thinking they needed her. As a result, she successfully produced something she's proud of, Sejongwon. To test him, the mage faked being attacked by half a dozen soldiers. At that moment, the timid boy turned into a demon. Just remembering it makes Ellie tremble with joy. Despite being clingy, Sejongwon's combat abilities are top tier. And since Mai Renee also came on this mission, this is the perfect time to test her creation. That way, she can start adjusting the boy. Proudly, Ellie places a hand on Jongwon's shoulder. Then she kneels beside the boy and says it's all right, but he shouldn't go against Sunhoon like that. Everyone here is an ally. So Jongwon lowers his head and says he won't do it again. The conversation is interrupted by the sound of approaching zombies. Sunhoon and Mai Renee run for their lives, chased by 80 zombies. The boy shouts for Ellie to fire. The mage holds the cannon and begins charging it with her magic, forming a glowing sphere that grows as her power gathers at the core. Then she fires a monstrous plasma beam that obliterates all the skeletons, turning them to dust. At that moment, the protagonist understands what she was talking about. The cannon is top tier. Ellie tells Sunhoon to take care of the stragglers, so he calls Mai Renee and advances into the dungeon. But the young demon sword stops in her tracks. The scene before her is nearly unbelievable. If before she thought Sung-hoon was strong, now it looks like he's dancing between the enemies in perfect sync with the rhythm of ragatanga. But Mai Renee is mistaken. It's not actually a dance. He's just so good that it looks like one. Poor girl. So she stands there, dumbfounded, thinking the best of them all has somehow managed to surpass himself. Meanwhile, the boy is still killing zombies. Not forgetting to make heads fly, of course. At this point, decapitation has become a hobby. From afar, Ellie and Jongwon watch the protagonist's smooth moves. The mage even gives him a standing ovation. Sung-hoon turns back and says the mage's cannon is way more impressive than his dancing. But Ellie counters that her rifle takes too long to charge and is very expensive, so it's situational. Then Mai Renee asks the question on everyone's mind. Why isn't the kid fighting? And our boy agrees. It would be great if Jongwon actually joined the battle instead of being carried. The boy was about to make excuses, but Ellie decides there's no way around it. So the mage tells Jongwon that he doesn't need to go all out, but he should at least fight once. The boy is surprised but agrees. Both turn to the warriors and Ellie says she'll show them what her boy is capable of when he tries. And the kid gets all nervous, realizing there's no way out now. Sung-hoon is actually curious to see what the boy can do and decides to fight. Well, even if he doesn't get it now, he'll find out soon enough. For now, the protagonist focuses on the skills he's using. Even though he's managing to fight by combining dance with the opposing force ability, the style still feels clunky. The rapier in his right hand makes his swordsman skills shine, and it's ideal for casting magic with his left hand. Although using a staff or wand is a viable option, he still has to use talismans, which makes everything more complicated. So the young man takes advantage of having a mage in front of him and asks if she knows anything about magic books, but she says no, since she's never used one either. Books have low magic amplification and slow casting time, but Ellie remembers she got a magic book in the last battle. So she hands the protagonist an old, worn-out book. It's really just an ordinary book with weak stats, but at least it can store scrolls. And his paper talismans might count as scrolls for the item. So Sung-hoon tries inserting a seal into the book cover, and it works. The item absorbs the talisman, creating an electric surge that makes the pages turn on their own. The protagonist then uses the magic emanating from the pages to charge the runic blade. It's not perfect, but it yields great results. The rapier shines with electricity, and now the young man knows he can use books to activate the legendary sword. Around him, the allies watch with some curiosity, but it's no surprise since they know Sung-hoon is his spellblade. Mai Renee interrupts the moment, saying she senses enemies moving just ahead. In a few steps, the team will run into zombies. So the protagonist asks the kid if he wants help, since there are probably dozens of monsters ahead. And at first, Jongwon agrees. But Ellie cuts in and says the boy doesn't need help. On his own, he should be able to handle it. Imagine if this woman were a bank manager. To seal the deal, the mage tells Sung-hoon he doesn't understand the situation. His help isn't needed. Then Sung-hoon asks where she's getting all this confidence from. Renee grows concerned and asks if the mage might be overestimating the boy. The mage ignores the two and asks Jongwon how long he'll need to eliminate all the enemies. The little boy says about 5 minutes should be enough. Then Ellie pulls a red bottle from her inventory and removes the cap. Just from the smell, the protagonist recognizes the item as a poison that causes people to lose consciousness. Then the woman tells the child to drink the poison and he downs it like it's a Yakult. After the boy finishes drinking the potion, Ellie places her hand on his head and summons a magic circle the size of a 12-slice pizza in front of the boy. The sweet eyes of little Jongwon turn into a gaze filled with cruelty. When the mage lets go of the kid, he immediately springs into action. Sung-hoon tries to ask Jongwon to wait, but the kid is already far ahead, so Renee suggests they follow him. When the sword-wielding duo arrives at the battle scene, they're both in shock. The monsters in the chamber are being completely obliterated. In the middle of the immense zombie horde, Jongwon remains unfazed. The kid sweeps through the monsters one by one, leaving behind a pile of bodies. Even some zombies tucked away in a corner minding their own business decide to check out what the hell is going on. And there's the boy, holding up a whole zombie with one hand, the creature all stat like it's about to die a second time. But Jongwon takes it further. He wants to psychologically terrorize the monsters themselves, so he places the blade on the creature's neck while staring into the eyes of the others. And with a single motion, slices off the monster's head, neck, and all. Then he kicks the headless body on top of the two other zombies that were watching. You can tell the kid has completely lost it. Now all he thinks about is catching them, frying them, and turning them into mash. Sung-hoon wonders if maybe Jongwon has multiple personalities. Meanwhile, the boy is over there spinning his knife like an Alta Catarina. One of the monsters manages to sink its teeth into the young maniac's shoulder, but instead of reacting like a normal person, screaming or swearing or something, Jongwon just tells the creature it bit first. Then the kid opens his mouth and goes after the zombie. The zombie panics. This can't be happening. But it is, and the boy bites a chunk out of the zombie's face. Even the protagonist, with all his questionable morals, is left speechless this time. He furiously asks the mage what she did to that child. Ellie calmly responds that she didn't do anything extreme. She simply cast a witch-exclusive spell on him called Berserker. Not fully convinced, Sung-hoon asks the woman if that's really all she did. Ellie explains that the spell boosts the target's abilities and keeps them in a rage until the effect wears off. Even though the boy got a little push from the poison combined with the spell, what they're seeing now is Jongwon's true nature. So the protagonist starts to think that maybe the boy is the very definition of a killer, but on second thought, he's more like a psychopath. The boy finishes clearing the room and spits out a piece of zombie that was stuck in his teeth. Then he turns to the rest of the group and says that when he starts fighting, his personality shifts a bit, which makes teamwork harder. Dear God, imagine if his personality changed a lot. Mai Renee tells Sung-hoon she has to be honest. If this child can't distinguish friends from enemies during battle, he's far too dangerous to keep as an ally. But our guy can't stop thinking about the prophet. The kid's combat skills are on par with top frontline fighters. Someone just needs to keep an eye on him. Then the protagonist asks if the triggers are a potion and a spell. How do you turn off the killer mode? Ellie responds that you don't, which is why she asked how much time he needed. Sung-hoon considers, what should he think about having a psychopath as an ally? And what should he do if the kid suddenly snaps and stabs him in the back? Mai Renee is about to give the sensible answer, but our guy interrupts and says it's fine. So Jongwon's task will be to stay in the rear and protect the mage. At that moment, Renee is sure the protagonist has lost his mind. So the girl asks if she heard wrong or if Sung-hoon really plans to keep that little psychopath on their team. But the protagonist doesn't care about her. He turns to the boy and says he can gain field experience while learning to control his anger. Then once again, Mai Renee calls out Sung-hoon and asks why on earth he accepted that sick, psychopathic kid. The young man pretends to have a good heart and says that if there's anything he can do to help an ally, he would definitely want to help as much as possible. Then the girl is surprised by the size of the risk he accepted and asks what they're going to do if the boy snaps and attacks them. And with the utmost nonchalance, the protagonist replies that they'll just stop the kid themselves. Mai Renee wonders how this man could come to that conclusion after what he just witnessed. Sung-hoon must be capable of things she can't even imagine. Jongwon, meanwhile, is surprised by how easily the man accepted him. The only other person who had ever accepted him like that until now is Ellie. Obviously, all the reasons the protagonist has given so far were lies he made up on the spot to convince the others. Our little villain follows the rule of betraying before being betrayed. If he sees something suspicious, he handles it himself. Now that he possesses Hydra Poison, which can even affect an NPC, dealing with Mai Renee or Ellie wouldn't be too hard either. Besides, if they don't use this method to control Jongwon, someone else will. And our maniac is excited to see where this all goes. But enough hanging around in the dungeon. It's better to finish the mission and get out. A shiny little comet crosses the sky of the void. The shadow of a castle floats among the stars. Inside it, a silver-haired deity named Lucifer tends to some floating spheres while complaining about life. He's the only supervisor of all the worlds created for the missions. Loki arrives through the shadows and asks the fellow if he needs help, but the man wants none of it and immediately refuses. Then the god dressed like an Enzo says it shouldn't be surprising that Lucifer already knew what his plan was. And the man agrees. It makes no sense for Loki to be surprised because it happens all the time. The boy god gets annoyed and floats toward Lucifer like a ballerina. While watching the spheres, Loki notes that the man manages over 10,000 worlds alone and asks why he doesn't ask the other gods for help. Lucifer says he was personally tasked with watching over the worlds, but as for the reason he doesn't ask other gods for help, the man stops talking when he sees that Loki is about to discover the reason. As soon as he gets too close to the sphere, the deity's left arm twists like a screw in the opposite direction. Then Lucifer reveals that this is the only reason he doesn't ask other gods for help. Loki quickly resets his arm back to normal. And when the god complains about the pain, Lucifer just tells him to shut up and asks what the real reason is for his visit. The trickster god remembers how much he hates dealing with this guy, so he deflects and says he wanted to talk about what the next event will be and what the next forced mission is. Lucifer reveals that the next event will be a martial arts tournament. As for the forced mission, there were 3 candidates. A bluish world, one red as hell, and a third that looked a bit like Earth. Then Loki starts to talk about the forced mission, but Lucifer cuts him off, saying he doesn't take suggestions. The boy god asks why the man is so cruel. Annoyed, Loki stands in front of the table where the 3 candidates are laid out. Only one of those worlds would be chosen for the next compulsory mission. One of them is a dungeon for exploring a massive red labyrinth. Another is a mission where the objective is to protect a castle. But the last one really catches Loki's attention. Then the trickster god uses his powers to completely poison one of the 3 worlds. He picks up the little pillow holding the spheres with both hands and starts tossing the balls at Lucifer like it's a game. Lucifer panics. One must not be so careless with the spheres. Loki pretends it has nothing to do with him, waves goodbye, and wishes him good luck. Then Lucifer realizes that something is definitely wrong. Even though it's faint, he can feel the power affecting one of the spheres. He flies into a rage and destroys the world with his own hand. Loki skips through the castle garden. The other god must have just discovered what he did. None of the other gods would dare destroy a world that's already complete. but Lucifer does it without a second thought. Normally, he would destroy all 3 worlds out of spite, but now there isn't much time left before the forced mission. It would be tough to create a new world in time even for Lucifer, so the only option left is to choose between the 2 remaining worlds. Since the last mission was already a dungeon exploration, the gods would prefer to avoid doing another one like it. That leaves only one world as a choice, a sphere where Loki discreetly planted a little gift. Loki's present can only be found by pure luck, and whoever finds it will receive unimaginable power. The god has high expectations for Sunghoon. Back in the city, the patch notes for the game have been released, announcing the martial arts tournament event and stating that the next forced mission has a B-level difficulty. Renee notes that the update must have popped up while they were in the dungeon, and Sunghoon is annoying that he's reading it late. There are 15 days until the tournament and also until the forced mission. The protagonist has started to realize that what he can do alone is no longer enough. He needs to make more trustworthy allies. And once again, we head to the weapon shop. Ellie tells Sunghoon that she has a negotiation skill, so he can hand over whatever he wants and she'll sell it for him. He agrees. Watching from a distance, the protagonist notices that the mage managed to make 50% more profit thanks to the negotiation skill. When it's his turn, the young man asks for a list of all the skill books being sold. Among the auctions, Sunghoon is interested in the dance skills to solidify his career as an idol. Although the protagonist is satisfied with the results brought by the dance skills, there are still some issues like close-range combat. So maybe if he learns to breakdance, he can make up for what the other skills lack. He ends up buying the low and mid-level breakdance abilities. Lulu admits she didn't expect such a shady-looking guy to be into dancing. Sunghoon says he's not shady. He's actually the best person around. Then the NPC mocks him, saying he'd only be right if all the good people in the world were dead. And that comment makes the guy pull a face like he's holding in a fart. The protagonist never imagined an NPC would give him their opinions so bluntly. Maybe it's the influence of the kinds of people who visit the place. Well, whatever, not like an NPC's opinion matters anyway. Next stop is the library. The girl at the counter asks what Sunghoon wants, and he requests intermediate weapon handling and all the skills related to books. Then the NPC double-checks if she heard right. He wants skills related to books. The guy confirms and politely asks her to bring them over. The girl agrees, a little glitchy. It's the first time someone has ever asked for reading-related skills. A few moments later, the NPC returns with a stack of dusty books. Sunghoon is surprised there are only 50. He expected more. The girl explains that in the end, they're just books about books. The protagonist concludes that since it's necessary to burn talismans to cast spells, a sword mage needs a book to be efficient. As he examines the books, he realizes half of them are useless. Then the girl shows up with another stack of books related to specific domains. While searching for the books the young man requested, the woman found some she didn't even know were in her own store. In the end, Sunghoon is interested in 3 abilities. The first is called Can't Live Without Books, which prevents books from falling out of his hands. The second, Book of Ghosts, gives him the ability to control the movement of books within a 2-meter radius. And lastly, Books Are Not Weapons, which ironically allows attacking and defending with books, scaling with the intelligence stat. These are all very useful skills, despite their strange names. So Sunghoon decides to take those 3 skills, plus low and very low level writing skills. The clerk says the total comes to 1,000,000 coins, but the guy is satisfied with the purchase and flips through a book, thinking this should be enough. Out of nowhere, the pages of the book he's holding begin to glow. Sunghoon receives a new title, Dedicated Reader. The title boosts his intelligence, magic, and luck, with the stats rising or falling based on how often he reads. Since the conditions for obtaining titles are random, no one really knows how to get them, but he's just received a very rare title purely by chance. The girl asks what happened, since the protagonist looks startled, but the young man just brushes it off and hurries out of her store, leaving the NPC curious about his behavior. Our guy strolls calmly and content through the city streets. He's still buzzing from the title thing, even though it's of the highest rarity, its effects are just too good. There's no way not to be excited. Doing the math, roughly in 40 days, he'll have gained 600 points in his stats. In that case, he'll soon be able to face rankers on his own. So Sunghoon starts thinking about the possible reasons why he received the title. If it were related to learning a specific skill, there would already be rumors going around. It could be tied to the percentage of skills he obtained, since the young man bought 5 out of 50 books. That's 10%. And if that's the case, the protagonist might be the only player who has learned 5 or more book-related skills. A unique rarity title for 1,000,000 gold? Not bad at all. Our little villain keeps walking through the crowd gathered at a specific spot in the city. Using what's likely a magic megaphone, an NPC announces the start of the martial arts tournament to the audience. A guy up front asks how long the event will last. The NPC reveals it will go on for 20 days. Then the same guy asks if there's a reason for it to be so long. The person next to him reminds him that the forced mission is also about to happen. So the NPC explains that the tournament will be paused during the forced mission and continue afterward. Someone then asks what happens if they die during a mission. Obviously, anyone who dies in the mission is disqualified. Dead players don't compete. The people in the audience get angry, saying none of this makes sense and the rules are just made up as they go. But Sun-hoon sees an advantage. After the forced mission, he'll already have gained 300 points in stats, not even counting what he earns during the mission. Our guy walks up to the front to register for the tournament, startling the whiny guys. Then the NPC takes the protagonist's info and finishes registering him for the event. The person in charge of the tournament asks Sun-hoon if he wants to skip the preliminaries, and the young man asks if that's already possible. The NPC says yes, if he participates in 3 rounds of preliminaries and wins before the forced mission, he'll qualify for the main event. Since there are too many participants, the preliminaries can be done at any time. The NPC then asks if someone has a preferred alias, which gets the guy thinking. The infamous Choi Cheo-leung still hasn't given up on finding the jerk who ran off with his sword, so it's better for the protagonist to be discreet about his identity. Then the young man heads to a utility shop and walks out with shiny shoes so polished they could be used as mirrors. Sun-hoon also puts on a butler outfit and a mask, looking just like Sailor Moon's boyfriend. During the preliminaries, the ring is absurdly packed with players. People notice a really weird-looking guy. Some get annoyed because he's in costume during what they see as a serious event. Others just plan to take him out as soon as the match begins. Then the tournament NPC announces that the preliminaries are about to start and explains that people will be eliminated by falling out of the ring or dying. It ends when only 2 players are left standing. He reminds everyone that dying in the tournament will cost a life. The crowd goes quiet, waiting for the NPC to say more. One guy among the many asks if it's already started. The protagonist stays still, probably thinking about what kind of nonsense he's going to pull this time. With no answer, the guy in the middle of the ring gets annoyed and asks the NPC again if the fight can start or not. Since the guy walked closer to the edge to complain, Sun-hoon took the opportunity to kick him out of the ring to find out if it had started and also to shut the guy up. A loud voice announces that Kang Chang-shak has been eliminated for leaving the arena, and the guy is in shock. Our little villain laughs at the player and says it looks like the fight already started. Kang Chang-shak bites his lip, furious for being tricked in such a dumb way. Then he points at the protagonist and tells the other participants to start with him. But Yu Sun-hoon simply opens a book and begins to read, and the crowd watching all decide they really will start with him. First comes a dude sneaking up behind with a club, but all he sees is the blur of the protagonist's arm. A copy of The Lord of the Rings flies into his face and knocks out his teeth. The audience reacts in all kinds of ways. Some are stunned by the masked man's strength. Others are just trying to figure out if he really hit the guy with a book. The cover of the book is all stained with ketchup, but thankfully the pages are intact. The protagonist didn't expect much from the skill, but in reality, it's amazing. The way that guy's teeth flew out, it looks like this book doesn't scale just with intelligence, but with strength too. Then Sun-hoon, eager to test out his new toy, turns to the rest of the group and asks what they're waiting for. To top off the provocation, the protagonist strikes a cringe-worthy pose and asks if there's going to be a fight or not. But he's the one who charges at them, even though they're ready to face him in numbers. He lands a spinning kick to one guy's chin. The guy's neck twists and he drops to the ground like a sack of potatoes, making the people nearby even more terrified. The dude holding a sword like a baseball bat comes running and shouting. Sun-hoon blocks the attack with the book, which absorbs most of the impact. And the sword guy feels like he just struck a metal plate when he hit the book. Meanwhile, a few more guys arrive spouting generic battle lines. One by one, the players go after the protagonist with various weapons, and Sun-hoon simply dances around their attacks. Then some random dude tries to boost morale by saying the masked guy's not all that. But the young man finds that very rude and stabs the guy, who goes cross-eyed. Then the protagonist walks up to the now vegetative guy and says his sword isn't just for show. At last, the crowd starts realizing it's over for them, and Sun-hoon asks if he'd have any reason to bother provoking them. They're all weak, easy to eliminate. There's no point in wasting time with mind games. It sounds so absurd the players feel like they didn't understand. So the protagonist decides to explain that he's just beating up nudes for practice. The group is deeply offended, as if anyone there had a noble reason to be in the tournament. The rogue crosses his arms and says he only knows one thing, that masked jerk has a real talent for annoying people. Once again, Sun-hoon gets annoyed at the lack of manners. He's speaking respectfully to everyone and expects the same in return. And if they insist on continuing to be disrespectful, they better be ready, because then he's going to be the one getting angry. The players closest to the protagonist start calling for help from everyone around. To them, there's nothing they can do against such a large number of people. Meanwhile, Sun-hoon is flipping through the book, thinking about which spell to use today. And the chosen one this time is the Fire Talisman, projecting a cone-shaped burst of flames. A guy with a hammer screams, "Hot, hot." Another one caught in the blaze can barely breathe. Now it's time to practice something else. Sun-hoon uses the opposite pole ability to convert his magic power into agility, and our villain dances through the flames with lethal rhythm. Then the guy who lost his teeth wakes up, and when he sees what's happening, he's speechless. The sight is beautiful, the form is perfect, and the man is magnificent. It's like watching a choreographed fight scene. His feet constantly follow a rhythm. He's the center of the stage, needing no leader. He uses screams and explosions as music, a performance where dozens of people move with clear direction. It's as if the masked man is a conductor of people. Interrupting the guy's moment of awe, the rogue tries to flank the protagonist. Sung-hoon sidesteps and makes him trip. But before he can fall, our guy uses the book to stop him, since the rogue needs to stay upright to serve as a human shield. Ever since he landed in the mission world, Sung-hoon's killed people without any remorse. But other people have a conscience, so now that he's acquainted with them, they can't just attack freely. So the protagonist proceeds to clean up the ring. There's even a guy on the ground trying to crawl out of the arena to stop suffering. But of course, Sung-hoon reaches him first and asks where he thought he was going. The guy starts apologizing without even knowing what for, saying he just wants to live. But the protagonist only wants to know when he ever let the man speak to him like that, and the guy realizes he's screwed. Sung-hoon throws the runaway back into the middle of the arena and starts walking toward him. The man begs for mercy. Then the boy reassures him, saying that if the player cooperates with a little experiment of his, he'll let him go. Even if you can't truly die in the tournament, you can still have a very painful ending. The guy says nothing, just raises his hands as if to shield himself, which leaves the protagonist quite pleased with his cooperation. Then Sung-hoon starts explaining that his experiment isn't anything serious, it's just that he recently picked up the habit of fighting with books, and a question came to mind. The young man is curious about the attack power when holding a book. That's when the guy realizes he never had a chance to make it out alive and begs the boy to wait. But Sung-hoon simply proceeds with his experiment, and the book's attack power is thoroughly tested, until there's barely anything left of the man. Despite everything, the protagonist concludes that books aren't very suitable as weapons. The range is short, and they're hard to handle. But thanks to the can't live without book skill, Sung-hoon can control books to act according to his will, even when they're not in his hand. This way, he can materialize a book from his inventory onto the back of his hand and use it as a shield. The arena's magic megaphone announces the end of the preliminaries, with 2 players left standing. Sung-hoon is confused because he thought he had finished off everyone. The protagonist finds the second player when he looks behind him, and the guy is on his knees holding his head with both hands, clearly traumatized. As the boy approaches, the man lets out a squeal, showing his teeth, which now look like a chessboard. Even though Sung-hoon doesn't do anything else, the guy screams loudly, runs away, and calls him the devil. Then, maybe because of the teeth, the protagonist recognizes the man as the one who fainted at the beginning of the fight. Apparently, the young man forgot about him, but whatever. So Sung-hoon turns to the tournament NPC and asks if the next round can start. The NPC says yes and asks the boy to wait a moment. The bodies lying on the ground begin to glow, and slowly all of them disappear from the battle arena. The NPC also restores the health and mana that the protagonist used in the first round. Once again, a voice in the arena announces that the participants of the next preliminary are arriving. The new group shows up and finds the place massive. A fool in the crowd looks around for someone to team up with. This isn't just a chance to fight repetitive monsters. It's a chance to attack other players freely. It's everything our villain ever wanted, simply perfect. Then the arena's voice announces the start of the battle and repeats the previously stated rules. But this time, the NPC confirms it has begun, and Sung-hoon already smacks the nearest guy in the face with his book. The protagonist's glove is so filthy it would be better to toss it and buy a new one. He just finished all 3 preliminary rounds of the tournament, even if for now the young man has been doing as he pleases under the alias of Phantom. If someone close to him like Ellie or Rinne sees him, not even a mask will hide who he is. So either the protagonist exposes himself as a villain to his team, or he starts restricting his actions while working as the Phantom. It's something to think about. Meanwhile, in the secret meeting room of Clan Hatefa, Hui Chul-hyung yells to the heavens that he's raising the reward for finding the con artist to 25 million, and asks his colleagues to put more effort into the task. Kang Moo-hen can't believe the guy is still hung up on this. Yu Baek-woo thought he'd have forgotten about it by now. One of Moo-hen's shadows says it'll be impossible to find them because they could be hiding in anyone's inventory. Chul-hyung replies that he's well aware of that, so why not just give up then? Then Baek-woo says maybe the king of beggars could find the scammer, but Moo-hen doesn't know who that is. The mage explains that he's a beggar who managed to convince all the other beggars to unite and form the Beggars Guild. Moo-hen asks what information they have so far, and the mage says that out of the top 100 rankers, 52 have been identified, 29 are in the process of being identified, and the remaining 19, only God knows. With that said, the leader of Hatefa orders them to increase the bounty and dig for more information, because if they don't know what kind of person is in their city, then they know nothing at all. Baek-woo affirms he understands and passes the word to Choi Yuja. The red-haired assassin sits silently at the end of the table. Choi Yuja, Yu Baek-woo, Kang Moo-hen, and Choi Chul-hyung. This council of the 4 top rankers was formed after the first forced mission. At night, some people are chatting in a tavern, and Moo-hen complains about the name of his spear. His second shadow asks what would be a better name, and the leader says he doesn't know, but even the city they're in is just called First City. You can tell the gods got lazy. The second city is probably just called Second City, and so on. Kang Moo-hen finds it odd, but also amusing. This plants the idea in Baek-woo's head that the name First City must imply the existence of other cities. And if the world was created in such a way that new cities appear slowly over time, people would end up losing no matter what. Besides, the first city not only has walls around it, but also an indestructible invisible barrier. The mage would never try to escape through it. Except for a minority of foreign immigrants, everyone in the first city is Korean. Unless the gods are obsessed with Koreans, it makes no sense for there to be only one country in the mission. Then a drunk interrupts Baeku's thoughts by offering him another beer. But the mage slams his hand on the table and stands up, and says completely out of context to everyone present that it's possible other people from planet Earth are in different cities. A guy nearby is immediately unsettled, since that would mean even if they survive life in the city, they'll be forced to fight each other forever. Another guy argues that if other cities existed, the gods would have told them, but someone instantly shoots that down. Kang Moo-hen reminds the other players that not once have the gods been kind to them, so what Baeku is saying makes sense. Shadow number 2 asks what they're going to do about it, and the leader replies that fortunately all the top rankers are in that room. A secret alliance will need to be formed, and so begin an alliance whose goal is to benefit all members equally. Back in the secret room of Clan Hatefa, during the briefing, Choi Yuja talks about the alliance's latest acquisitions, blueprints for war weapons and military strategy info. He reveals that the military strategy is meant to organize a group of 5,000 people. Baeku concludes that the war weapons aren't just for completing missions, they're also to prepare for an actual war. The alliance exists for this purpose, identifying the strongest players who sells the best items and developing a project that the members are really hoping will succeed. Then Muven asks Yuja how the development project is going. Meanwhile, Hatefa's leader just stares, stoic. Yuja thinks about how to avoid weakening the alliance he has to put up with someone like Kang Moo-hen, who looks down on others. Even in a way, the player informs them of the teams in charge as well as their objective to calculate the most efficient route. Since this is a large-scale mission and it's hard to reach a consensus, they still haven't settled on a path. So Muven tells them to keep doing their best. Once they find the route, the city's military strategy will improve drastically. Among the 40,000 inhabitants, around 60% are bronze or iron rank. The development project will share mission rewards with these players, boosting the overall skill average in the city. Then Kang Moo-hen ends the meeting by reminding the other top rankers of the 3 priority tasks, and they acknowledge it with soldier-like discipline. Outside, near some cute little houses, the protagonist spots 3 shady individuals. If you thought we were talking about the guys on the wanted board, just know we were actually talking about his own group. After Sung-hoon shows interest in the cost of forming a team, Ellie is outraged and asks if he's thinking of creating a guild full of Luna eggs. The young man tells the mage she's not wrong and thinks about how he needs to find people willing to die on the job. Our maniac starts considering the idea of founding a cult. But before he could entertain the thought further, the ground gets weird and a glowing blue system light starts blinking. That's when he realizes he's being teleported without any warning. Thankfully, it's a very familiar place, Jerry's little world. The deity offers the young man a drink. Sun-hoon sits at the counter and says he wants to get straight to the point. Jerry loves how their conversations are always surgical. So the assistant cuts to the chase and says that the next force mission is completely different from any he's done before. Then this Jerry guy asks the young man if he likes playing Battle Royale. The protagonist is surprised at the idea of a survival-style game. The only requirement for the next force mission is to stay alive for a month, even if it's as a limbless husk barely breathing. But Sun-hoon says something still feels off. He wants to know if there really won't be any monsters in this mission. Jerry says there won't be anything dangerous, just some monsters that are only slightly stronger than regular animals. And the protagonist can't accept how far this mission deviates from the usual. Even though the last mission was S rank in difficulty, everyone had incarnated in NPC bodies and received various types of support. So Sun-hoon says that even the strongest ranker groups would struggle to survive a B rank mission using their own bodies. But Jerry says the protagonist is right. If it were just a survival mission, calling it B rank would be overkill. That's why there are 2 possible conditions to complete the mission. One of them is plain and simple murder. If you take someone out, a meal and a bottle of water appear in your inventory. Sun-hoon cuts him off and asks, annoyed, where the mission will take place. The assistant promptly replies that it's an inaccessible island near the continent, but for an island, the place is way too big. That makes the protagonist uncomfortable, and Jerry begins to explain that the gods don't just want people who are strong. The mission evaluates survival, caution, relationships, and various other factors. So the protagonist finally asks about the second condition that can also complete the mission. While pouring wine, Jerry explains that the mission will also have reward points available, so he can farm. Sun-hoon asks if players really only need to survive for a month, and the assistant confirms, but says that if everyone made it, it would be a miracle. The boy catches the irony and says that if the gods wanted a miracle, they wouldn't have created the first condition. Jerry justifies it by saying the condition is necessary to reveal people's true nature, and Sun-hoon agrees. Our boy places the empty wine glass on the counter. Then the assistant warns that the mission will begin shortly and asks the player to survive, because he wants to see him again in a month. Then the deity claps a few times, and Sun-hoon is materialized on a beautiful island surrounded by crystal clear water. There's nothing on top, and there's something down below. Sung-hoon hugs himself while thinking how he couldn't bear to lose his precious self a second time. A voice from beyond tells the players they've received an auto map that updates their location every 24 hours. The protagonist notices that the map shows locations with food and clean water, so dying of hunger is entirely avoidable. In addition, there are 3 types of missions: gold, green, and red. Gold missions are related to doing good deeds. Green missions are about survival techniques. And lastly, there are the red missions, which are related to cruelty and scheming. Sung-hoon is delighted. It seems like the red missions were made just for him. But just as he's finishing reading the new system features, something catches his attention. A gust of wind signals that nearby a conflict is taking place, and the protagonist thinks those guys are in quite a hurry. But maybe it's time for him to start getting ready too. Since they're between forests and mountains, armor would only wear out the body. And even though Sung-hoon is a spellblade, he always played the game like a rat. This mindset gives our boy a big advantage in this mission. The protagonist activates a wide variety of skills and thinks about how it was worth learning a little bit of everything. But the young man still wonders if the markings on his map are thanks to a skill he has called shortest route. Then Sung-hoon starts wandering and decides he's going to do everything at his own pace. The island has beautiful vegetation and vibrant colors, and the water in the lakes is a crystalline blue. Our boy finds a large body of water. For some reason, the water tastes good. Here, the young man should be able to check the system safely. There are some interesting things here, man. The first optional mission is called A Truly Good Man. To complete it, you can't kill anyone for a whole month and must generally act as a good Samaritan. The second is The True Survivalist. It requires 150 gold and red submissions, as well as 400 green submissions. And lastly, there's A Truly Bad Man, and one of the conditions is to kill more than 666 missions. That's right, 666. None of the missions seem easy, and you can only pick one. Obviously, our maniac chooses the Bad Man mission and decides to start the day by doing a few quests. First, he pours hydrovenom into the water source. Even diluted due to the water volume, it will still have an effect. Sung-hoon is confident the potion didn't turn the lake into an evil spring, and he tastes just a little bit, just to be sure. His passive skills start detecting the effects of the poison, and the young man spits the water out. While taking the antidote, the protagonist thinks it turned out good enough. Then Sung-hoon uses the monkey no jutsu skill and climbs a tree. A month later, the boy is still watching people from the top of the tree. Killing monsters and killing people are completely different things. There probably aren't many lunatics out there killing others. Just like in movies, people will prefer to form groups and help each other. But this preview of the future feels a little too optimistic for the protagonist's taste. Slowly, Sung-hoon will poison them and stir up conflict, making a peaceful mission impossible. At the moment, the boy has enough food and water to last 5 days. Some random noob finally finds the water source our little villain poisoned. He's not alone, there's a group of 4 people with him, and for some reason, they look ready to fight. It just so happens that another group of 4 people shows up on the opposite side of the river at the same time. They're also tense. From up in the tree, Sung-hoon watches the tension between the 2 teams unfold. The first noob tries to convince the second group to settle things through conversation, and some generic guy asks why they should trust them. Then the first guy asks him if he'd rather fight. The generic guy thinks about it and concludes it's not worth starting a fight when they're outnumbered. Then the guy with the piercing tries to convince him that a fight would only hurt everyone, and a mage on his side asks why he thinks he's the leader. He just replies that if she wants to stand there like a weirdo holding her weapon, she's free to do so. The noob with the piercing tastes the water and even lets out a little gasp. Apparently, the water really does taste good. Then the pacifist asks if everyone's just going to stand around staring, but no one answers right away. Eventually, the generic guy makes a point of saying that if anyone even thinks about betrayal, they'll regret it. Then he crouches like a dog to drink the water. His teammates try to stop him, but in the end, it doesn't matter. Some time later, but still during the day, the leaders of both groups sit down to talk, and the generic guy asks the noob how he met his group. The guy says he just found them by chance. Then the blonde guy asks if it was the same with the ordinary one, and he says yes. So the noob suggests that they all work together. Sung-hoon evaluates the latest events. The team seems solid, and the poison hasn't started affecting them yet. But the protagonist has plans to shatter the peace of these poor adventurers. For now, he hops from branch to branch like he's in the Hidden Leaf Village. The groups decide to make the lagoon their base and split up to search for food. The generic guy says it sounds like a good plan, but he's not the leader of his group and can't say whether they'll follow along. The annoying mage shouts at the guys, asking how long they're going to just stand around doing nothing. Then a woman washing her feet in the lagoon asks if it's time to go looking for food. The generic guy wonders who this woman even is, and why she's relaxing in the lagoon like she's on vacation. Some dude who looks like a construction worker asks if she doesn't think it's rude to wash her feet in the same water everyone's drinking. The mage bluntly says her feet hurt, and it won't take long. Then the ordinary guy decides to provoke the lazy one, asking if she's going to keep soaking her feet while they hunt for food. She says she's not resting, she's keeping watch. Then the generic guy says he'll be the one on guard duty and tells the woman to go hunt. The mage glares at him, annoyed. But before things can escalate, the blonde guy asks why things are getting tense again and then asks for everyone's attention. The team will rotate tasks. 2 groups will hunt for food while 1 guards the camp. As soon as the leader finishes speaking, the redhead asks if she can be in a different group from the generic guy. He forces a laugh and thanks her for saying exactly what he was thinking. And the blonde guy with the piercing can only think about how much trouble these grown-up babies are going to cause. If things keep going this way, the group members are going to start hating each other. But the leader is determined to solve everything diplomatically. If there's no communication, the team is already done for. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.